I'd like to call this meeting to order and welcome everyone to our electronic council meeting on May 19th, 2021. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Regional Council is practicing physical distancing. I am in the chamber. All other members are participating electronically. I would like to acknowledge the land on which we gather virtually today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements and their contributions. And I would like to observe that what the Indigenous people who I have walked along with have taught me is that our relationship to the land is one of stewardship and not ownership. Colleagues, I would also like to point out that today happens to be a personal support worker day. And I know that all of us have appreciated the amazing heavy lifting, the sacrifice, and the dedication to the people they care for that personal support workers have demonstrated through this pandemic. So in honor of their hard work, in honor of those who have succumbed to COVID-19, I would ask for a moment of silence. Thank you, colleagues. I would now ask Jessica Rudy to do a roll call.
Chair Redmond.
Present.
Councillor Armstrong.
Present.
Councillor Clarke.
Present.
Councillor Erb.
Present.
Councillor Foxton. Councillor Foxton. Councillor Galloway.
Present.
Councillor Harris.
Oh, but present.
Councillor Jaworski.
Here.
Councillor Jowett.
Present.
Councillor Kiefer.
Present.
Councillor Lorentz.
I'm here.
Councillor Mann. Councillor Mann. Councillor Nowak.
Present.
Councillor Shantz.
Present.
Councillor Strickland.
Here.
Councillor Vervanovich.
Present.
And I'll just go back to Councillor Foxton. And Councillor
Present.
Mann. Oh,
Present.
thank you. And Councillor Mann. So all present except for Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, colleagues. I would now entertain a motion to reconvene in open session. If I could have a mover. Moved by Councillor Clarke, seconded by Councillor Nowak. All those in favor, please use your icons to vote yes and no. Thank you, colleagues. That is carried. We are now in open session. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, I would like to start tonight's meeting off with a presentation by John Mascarin, our Integrity Commissioner. There is a report that has been on the website and is part of our package on MCIA applications 2020-01 and 2020-02. Regional Councillor Elizabeth Clarke. And I would like to welcome Mr. Mascarin to do his presentation of the report and answer any questions. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good evening, members of council. I'm here representing your Integrity Commissioner. My law firm, Aird & Burles in Toronto, is the Commissioner for the region of Waterloo. I've appeared before you once before, and tonight I'm here to speak on the two MCIA applications that Madam Chair just introduced. And just before I get to them, I'll tell you why I'm here speaking about it. it used to be that the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act was a statute that could only be enforced by an elector going directly to the courts. And that changed at the beginning of 2019. On March the 1st, 2019, the Bill 68 amendments to both the Municipal Act as well as the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act came in force. And that said that an applicant or a person demonstrably acting in the public interest could file an application with the integrity commissioner of a municipality to bring forward allegations of breach of the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. And that's exactly what happened in this case. So that's why I'm before you tonight. You have a rather complete report. The report entails two applications that were filed with the Office of the Clerk at the region, who then forwarded them to my office. The investigation was undertaken by one of my associates in my office, and then he and I together drafted the report and formed the analysis, and you have the findings in front of you. And now, typically, I would go rather short on the report and just ask you for any questions, but this is the first time that you've actually had me in front of you on an MCIA, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act application. So if you don't mind, I will just be a little more detailed than I normally would, and I'll walk you through the report. Normally, I would say that the report speaks for itself, but I do want to address a few things. Firstly, let me say that the old adage that you can't tell a book by its cover really applies in this case. If you looked at just the surface, you would say, I think there might be an issue here. So let me say, first of all, that we found no contraventions at all on the part of Regional Councillor Clarke with respect to her obligations under the MCIA. But I don't blame the applicants for coming forward, because there is at least on the surface a question of whether there was a possible contravention. So the report, as I said, details in much more detail than I will speak to you tonight the entire matter, but I'll just go to the salient points. There were two formal applications that were filed under the Municipal Act with my office, and they were filed on December the 11th and December the 15th. Both applications are very similar, and they allege that Regional Councillor Clarke failed to comply with the obligations under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act at a meeting of Regional Council on December the 2nd of 2020, which involved the closure of 5 regional operated childcare centers. And the allegations were that she breached her obligations under Section 5 of the Act, which was she didn't declare pecuniary interest on the matter of the closures of the childcare centers, and then she participated and voted on the actual closure recommendations that had been put forward by staff. Section 223.4.1 of the Municipal Act provides that the Integrity Commissioner can conduct an inquiry into these matters, can look at it, form an assessment, and actually make a decision. So in this case, it's very different from us looking at a code of conduct complaint, where we receive a complaint under the region's code of conduct, investigate it, and then report back to council. We do not make decisions. Council makes a decision. Tonight, the roles are reversed. The statute requires that the Integrity Commissioner make a decision and merely report to council. So tonight, you are not being asked to make any decision. You can certainly ask me any questions about the report, but there are no decisions that council has to make, and I will report on my decision here. Council does have to publish the reasons, and they have been published. They're on your agenda for tonight, beginning at page 54, and they will remain on an archived form of the agenda, so they will be published in my view. As I said, the applications focus on Section 5 and the alleged contraventions of Regional Councillor Clarke. And this really resides in the indirect pecuniary interest provisions of the Act, Section 2. And that section says that if any member has is a corporate director, which Regional Councillor Clarke is, or is a senior officer, is a member of a body, is a member of a partnership, or is an employee of a member of an entity coming before council, or that may be impacted by council in a financial manner, that person has a pecuniary interest. It has an indirect pecuniary interest, and that's under Section 2. So in this case, the allegations were that Regional Councillor Clarke, by virtue of being the CEO of the YWCA in Waterloo, an entity that provides childcare services, had a direct financial interest in the closure of the 5 regional operated child care centers. This was a matter, of course, that was very sensitive, hotly debated, and quite contested. So again, Regional Councillor Clarke is the Chief Executive Officer of the YWCA of Kitchener-Waterloo. It is a nonprofit organization, and it provides early learning and child care services. It is also a licensed provider of child care services. Now, the region has a role in the child care system because it is a designated service system manager for the purposes of the Child Care and Early Years Act 2014. The region itself is a licensed child care operator and directly operated 5 child care centers providing spaces for 207 children. But back in 2015, the region engaged KPMG to conduct a comprehensive service review, which included a review of the region's provision of childcare services. The long gestating reports came forward, and KPMG outlined a number of options with respect to the region's childcare services, one of which included an option which recommended the complete closure of all of the region's operated childcare centers. This matter went forward, and it was considered by the steering committee, and then a final decision was deferred to the regional council, and that was December the 2nd of 2020. The sole matter, the sole agenda item that evening was what we've called the closure recommendation, which is on page 6 of our report. And you'll read the recommendation. There's a number of recitals to it. And at the very end, it says, therefore be it resolved that the region of Waterloo focus on our role as a service system manager and thereby close or discontinue the operations of the 5 regional operated centers. So the recommendation was voted on. No member of council that evening declared a pecuniary interest, including Regional Councillor Clarke. Regional Councillor Clarke actually moved the closure recommendation. It was seconded by Councillor Erb, and it was carried by a vote of 12-3 in favor of the recommendation to close. The 2 applications that came forward, they were separate, didn't seem to be connected or had spoken to each other. They were separate applications, indicated that by virtue of Councillor Clarke being the CEO of a childcare center, there was a pecuniary interest, and she had an indirect pecuniary interest under Section 2. Our report determines otherwise, and you'll find our findings at top of page 9 of our report. Our determination, quite clear, was that there was no pecuniary interest. There was no indirect pecuniary interest, either in the YWCA of Kitchener-Waterloo, nor of Councillor Clarke herself. To have a conflict under the MCIA, there must be a pecuniary interest. Pecuniary is not defined in the Act, but it means an economic, financial, or monetary interest. And it has to exist, or there has to be a reasonable expectation that it will exist at the time of the vote. The pecuniary interest must be definable, it must be real, and what it can't be is hypothetical or speculative. And in our view, the allegations brought forward in the applications were merely speculative. There was no hard evidence or anything to prove that there was a real discernible financial impact, whether through a redistribution or reallocation of funds or through the real probability of other persons losing the ability to go to the regional controlled childcare centers would end up going to the YWCA that Regional Clarke is the CEO of. There was, one, no immediate transfer of funding anywhere in the report. In the recommendation, there were no cash transfers that were proposed in that report and that recommendation. There was no evidence that there would be a real increase of enrollment at the YWCA spaces given the closure of the regional centers. And finally, there was only a remote possibility of children transitioning to the YWCA childcare centers. So on those bases, we found that the closure recommendation that was voted on 12-3 that evening on December the 2nd did not present an immediate traceable financial benefit to the WCA, which would flow through to the councillor. Now, if we were wrong in that, we also considered whether there was any exceptions under Section 4 of the MCIA that applied, and we believe that the remote and insignificant exception under Section 4K was also applicable. Our analysis of that exception and its applicability is at the top of page 13 of our report. And the question that comes from a case from 1999, Whiteley and Schnurr, is would a reasonable elector, being apprised of all of the circumstances, be more likely than not to regard the interest of the councillor as likely to influence the councillor's action and decision on the question? That is the central question to be asked. And then you'll see that there is our analysis of the Ontario Court of Appeals decision in Ferry and Attorney General of Ontario, where the court very clearly says when you're considering the remote or insignificant exception under Section 4K, you have to do a two-stage analysis. So when you're determining whether there might be a benefit to the entity that gets the benefit that then indirectly might benefit the council member, you have to start that afresh. And you can't assume that the same proximity that resides in the entity will reside with the member. And so when we looked at the context of all of the circumstances of the matter, and these are set out in detail in the bullet points on page 14, we could not come to the conclusion that a reasonable elector would determine that Councillor Clarke somehow didn't have a remote or insignificant interest in the matter so as to apply the exemption. So on that basis, we determined for two reasons. One is there was no evidence of a direct, traceable, indirect pecuniary interest. And even if there was, and even if we're wrong in that determination, then Councillor Clarke would be subject to the exception under Section 4K of the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act for remote or insignificant interest. So, Madam Chair and members of council, On that basis, it is our determination that there is no conflict under the Act, and therefore, our role is to determine whether we will make an application to the court to determine whether the member has a pecuniary interest and has contravened the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and we will expressly not be doing so. So the decision is the Integrity Commissioner's decision, and we are reporting it to you tonight in our report. We provided full procedural fairness to Councillor Clarke to respond, and as well to the applicants to reply to her response. And our determination is that there is no conflict of the statute, and therefore we will not be making application to the court. Madam Chair, members of council, I thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I probably spoke at a little bit more length than I maybe should have, but I would be pleased to answer any questions that anyone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mascarin, and I would just point out that this is received for information, no action required. And Councillor Harris, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Mascarin, for your thorough report, and Aaron and Burles, but I believe you were the architect and author of the report, and your staff, so thank you for doing so. Obviously, the MCIA is a very important process to, the integrity of our system, democracy, etc. I will say, it's great to see that the timely fashion of this report was concluded relatively quickly. I mean, it took roughly 6 months by the time of the application to the resolution here tonight. So we're thankful for that. I want to thank the member, Elizabeth Clarke, for her efforts in knowing the MCIA initially. I know that we're all faced with these decisions on every council agenda to know if we should declare a conflict or not. I would add that perhaps our spouses are also into that consideration when we need to declare. I want to thank her for her, the willingness to obviously contribute to your report, and for her contribution to such an important discussion that our council has recently had on this matter. It is unfortunate at times when the community perhaps does not like, an outcome that folks, go this route, knowing it is a route that they can take to potentially, drag a councillor or elected official through it. But it's an important process, so it's there for the right reasons. I will say, having had some recent experience with this myself, taking almost 2+ years, I have to note that you cited. A recent case that I was involved in, and you cited it. So that was kind of interesting to see. So congratulations on that. I have one question, and I know it's a little bit of a preamble to that, is why were the applicants not disclosed in this application? Should I not know? And why wasn't their names published in this report?
Mr. Mascarin?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Harris, under the Municipal under the Municipal Act, 223.5 of the Act, everything that comes to the Integrity Commissioner is supposed to remain confidential. There is nothing in your complaint protocol, nor in the Municipal Act, that deals with this new provision where applicants can come forward and bring applications to the Integrity Commissioner that requires the disclosure of their identities. So on the basis of confidentiality of 223.5, I did not disclose them. There really isn't a reason to disclose them. And to Councillor Clarke's credit, one of the first questions that we're always asked is, who filed it? And I don't believe she ever asked that question, just dealt with the allegations as they were put forward.
Right, I had a more public process perhaps where it was very public in terms of who was filing that. So was that the actual change in the legislation as it pertains to the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act that allowed for that, or has that always been the case? And forgive me if I didn't know that already, but.
Madam Chair, through you back to Councillor Harris. Yes, it's a change in the legislation. As I said, Councillor Harris, at the beginning, and yours was very curious because it was filed 3 days after the new legislation had been put in place, and yet the applicants in your case decided to go directly to court and not file them with the Integrity Commissioner. I always queried, why that was the case. I wasn't your integrity commissioner at that time yet. You hadn't appointed me. And in fact, you may recall, in full disclosure, I did contact you about the matter because I was very curious at why it had started in the courts. It used to be that the elector could only go to the court, and so therefore the elector had to represent themselves as the applicant in court, so it wouldn't be subject to confidentiality. It is quite different, and I do believe now, if the matter would be going to court, that probably the names would have to be disclosed at some point. But as long as it resides only with the integrity commissioner, I don't believe that there's any requirement, unless your complaint protocol or your application protocol requires that. Some codes, for instance, throughout Ontario, require the disclosure of any complainant under a code of conduct complaint. And I find that a little unusual. Most complaint procedures do not require the disclosure of the person who's making the complaint. But I do believe it is in your purview to make that change and require that disclosure if you'd like.
Thank you for the answer. And now I do recall actually the phone conversation that I had with you. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. Obviously this is a much better route for, I think, all parties perhaps involved. Is there costs associated with this that go back to the applicants, or is this paid for by the municipality?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, back to Councillor Harris. It's a cost that's paid by the municipality entirely. There's a provision in the Municipal Act, I'm sorry, I don't have it handy right in front of me, but it does say all the costs of this process, of this accountability mechanism, are paid for by the municipality. And the difficulty is you can impose a fee, I suppose, for anyone who may be filing, but you never probably be able to get cost recovery for the cost of this. As you saw, the reports, well, it's pretty lengthy, and there was a lot of analysis that we had to do, considering that on its face it looked admittedly like there was something maybe wrong here, and clearly once you looked at it a little bit and scratched the surface, there really wasn't anything there. But on a first glance, someone would say, yeah, that does not look right. So I don't blame the applicants for bringing it forward, and I think I said that at the beginning, Councillor Harris.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'll conclude because I've got all these eyes staring at me, I feel like. Thank you for your work. I'd like to thank the councillor for keeping calm throughout this process. I know it weighs over your head when you have to go through something like this, not knowing perhaps where the outcome will land. I want to thank her for her contributions and being a professional that she is, and of course, obviously to you and your office for doing that. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you again.
Thank you, Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Yeah, I'm very proud of Elizabeth and how she withstood this. I know what couldn't have been easy, and she is a very, very respectful and thorough and honest individual. In hindsight, would it have been wiser? And I don't know if this is an unfair question. Would it have been wiser for her to have declared?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Foxton, that's a question I'm often asked, because one of the things that an integrity commissioner can do, of course, is provide written advice to any member of council who may have a question very much like that. And my view is this: you were elected to make decisions. To step away is on pure caution. To me, seems like you're abdicating your responsibilities. Yes, it might not have then immersed Councillor Clarke in this imbroglio and this investigation, which I acknowledge it's never pleasant. Believe me, it's not one of the most fun things that I have to do, is to look at these things. But to the other way, Councillor Foxton, is many people say, well, I'll just declare a pecuniary interest. I don't want to make that decision. That's wrong. that's just plain wrong. You're abdicating your responsibilities as elected members by doing that. The only thing I can say to you is if you're really unsure, you can always reach out to our office, which is one of the express authorities that integrity commissioners were given, so that you wouldn't be left to your own devices, or perhaps without any real recourse to advice. You can reach out to us for advice on questions just like that.
I thank you, and that's handy for all of us to know. So that's a very good. Just another point. I was being sued by an individual in the township, and I had to seek legal advice. And the advice the lawyer said is, you were the mayor, you acted as the mayor, you must stand up and deal with it as the mayor. And so I did. Elizabeth or anyone else, once you go through a litigation or a situation like this, any cost, if you are found not at fault, is covered by our insurance coverage at the region. So and I was told that afterwards as well. Thank you so much. It was very informative, and congratulations, Elizabeth.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry if I just could. I don't mean to tell you how to run this. I did want to make one comment though, Councillor Foxton, on that. I believe your insurance coverage does not relate to our investigation. It relates to a court application. I may be wrong. I haven't looked at yours, but I've looked at a number of them throughout the province, and they all seem to be very similar, and they all seem to relate specifically to court applications. In fact, if you look at Section 14 of the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, it talks about a court proceeding for insurance. That's the only time you can buy insurance. So I don't think you could get it for your advice on the Integrity Commissioner investigation or inquiry part of it. It's the court application part.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Mike, you're nodding your head yes, so Mike, thank you.
And just to reiterate, Mr. Mascarin, thank you very much for a very fulsome analysis of the report, of the process, as well as answering questions. And you are right in differentiating between when insurance would cover, and I believe that is a court process. Our clerk is agreeing that you are correct in that differentiation. And I want to thank Councillor Harris for asking questions that I know that I've received emails from the public about why the complainants' names weren't made public and who bore the cost. So that's now in the public record, so I think that was very helpful too. So thank you very much for continuing to be the center board in Waterloo Region Council's ethics commissioner and complaint system as we go forward. So thank you for that. And Elizabeth, you clearly have the support of all of council. You have carried yourself with a great deal of dignity through this. So thank you. And again, Mr. Mascarin, thank you very much for all the hard work.
Thank you very much. Good night, Madam Chair. Good night, Council.
So moving on, we are now going to go to our COVID update, and I'm just going to flag for all of council that we have Dr. Wang giving our pandemic update, and then we will have Deputy Chief Hilton doing our vaccine update. So don't ask all your questions of Dr. Wang. If you think the Deputy Hilton can also answer. And just, I'm going to start off by giving Dr. Wang a shout out. She was recognized by the Interfaith, at the Interfaith Prayer Breakfast this morning, and was honored to receive a prayer shawl for all of her hard work. You make us all very proud, Dr. Wang, and it's nice to see that the community appreciates your hard work too. I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much. I was so humbled by that, and really, really appreciate everything that the faith communities have done. Truly incredible. Yeah, thank you. So Kathy Prosh has pulled up my my slide deck. I only have a couple of slides. So this is the EpiCurve to date of our third wave, the one that's in yellow. So overall, the slow descent of our case rates has stalled for the moment. And we have also started to see clusters of cases as a result of family gatherings over Mother's Day. So the overall message is we cannot let up on our guard. As of today, our weekly incidence rate sits at approximately 72 cases per 100,000 per week. Ontario's rate has dropped considerably and is now at 92 cases per 100,000 per week. We are currently managing 476 active cases and 12 active outbreaks. We are seeing stability in our outbreak numbers. Taking into account interim data, our 7-day average per percent positivity, is now at 6.3%, and Ontario's has dropped as well to 6.8%. And we continue to have a significant number of COVID cases in our local hospitals. Next slide, please. So in closing, we are making good progress in our vaccination rollout, and vaccines are a critical tool to bring COVID-19 under control, but they are not enough to slow the spread of COVID-19 on their own. So we must keep practicing public health measures to drive our rates down. As you are aware, the stay-at-home order has been extended to at least June the 2nd. And as a reminder, this means we must all continue to only go out for essential purposes, only gather or do essential activities with the people you live with, maintain physical distancing when doing essential activities, and wear a mask or face covering in all indoor public spaces, on transit, and outdoors whenever distance is not guaranteed. This will be especially important as we head into the May long weekend. And finally, doing our best, each of us where we can, to minimize spread is the best way to support our healthcare workers, our essential workers, our businesses, our children, and our community as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. I think I'm going to go to Deputy Chief Hilton for a vaccine update, and then we will open to the floor for questions. Welcome, Deputy.
Thank you, Chair Redmond, and good evening, members of Council. So the Waterloo Region Vaccine Distribution Task Force is really pleased to highlight a couple of exciting milestones that we've reached in the vaccine rollout, with the administration of over 250,000 doses, 50% of adults aged 18 and older who have received their first dose of the vaccine. And Waterloo Region has succeeded in reaching its target of more than 75% vaccination coverage in adults 70 plus. And we're just shy of 74% in the 60 to 69 age group. On May 11th, we did open pre-registration to everyone 12 years of age and older, and had a record-breaking 45,000 people pre-register for an appointment. Last week, as you know, healthcare workers were added to the list of those eligible to receive their second dose of the vaccine, which is earlier than the extended 4-month interval. Those healthcare workers who already have a second dose booked between now and June 14th are asked to keep their original second dose appointment. And those who meet the eligibility requirements and wish to have their second dose at the shortened interval are asked to complete a form found on the Region of Waterloo website to reschedule their appointment for that shortened vaccine interval. It may take between 2 to 4 weeks to be contacted for that second dose appointment. This week, we saw our first real increase in the Pfizer vaccine, with an even larger anticipated allotment arriving by the end of the month and into June. With a more stable and increased supply of vaccine, we have been able to invite more people already in pre-registration to book an appointment. The eligible groups currently being invited are essential workers, adults 50 plus, individuals with at-risk health conditions, healthcare workers, and adults 18 plus living in priority neighborhoods. Just as a reminder, the region does not use the provincial vaccine appointment booking system. We continue to use our own. Opening pre-registration to additional groups does help the task prepare for the next group to be vaccinated. people are being invited to book an appointment based on priority and not necessarily when they pre-registered. So for example, if someone recently pre-registered and belonged to an earlier priority group, such as 70 plus, they will be invited to book an appointment when we send out batches of invites to the groups that I just mentioned. Right now, adults between the ages of 18 and 14 and youth between 12 and 17 years of age, unless they are in an earlier eligibility group, have not been sent an invitation to book yet. Although we have opened pre-registration, it still may be 4 to 6 weeks before they are invited to book. But this really is based on our vaccine supply. All of our clinics administer either the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine. Both are mRNA vaccines. Neither is better than the other. The main differences really relate to the temperature they are stored and steps to prepare and administer. We do encourage all residents who receive their invitation to book an appointment, please do so and accept whichever these vaccines are available. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. We have lots of questions, so we'll start with Councillor Lorentz. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Deputy Hilton, for your calm, cool, and collective approach to all of this and the great work that you do for our community. And I hope people realize how tough a job it is to do this and how well organized and available you've been. I see how there's a number of questions, so I really only have one, and it's my age group. I'm scheduled to go back for my second shot August 3rd or 4th, I think. And I'm wondering how we're going to progress and compress those people that are at the end of their 4 months, as opposed to now with the influx of more vaccine, stepping up and getting people in earlier and earlier. Do you have a game plan, or did I miss that?
Deputy Hilton?
Sorry, I'm just going to, hopefully I understood your question. You're wondering about how we're going to manage those that are getting their first doses and then...
No, I'm scheduled for my second dose in August 4th, and I'm wondering how we're going to, as supply increases, how do we move people closer to summer and closer to not having them left out at the end of their close to 3.5, 4. I mean, number of people are getting second doses already. I'm just curious as to what the plan is to try to speed up the process. Our notice is going to go out and say, hey, you were scheduled for July 31st. Now we're going to take you July 4th. Is that how it's going to work, or does everybody kind of just stay in place?
So right now, sorry, I do understand your question. So right now, we do only have a select group of people who have the shortened second interval. So it's not everybody that has the shortened second interval. So the highest or high-risk healthcare workers, and there's a whole list of them that the province announced last week that will have their shortened to either the 21 days for Pfizer or 28 days for Moderna. We did put the cutoff date to June 14th because just trying to get that, anybody who has an appointment on June 14th, they're really not going to get an earlier appointment. It might be earlier by a week. Also our Indigenous community, they have a shortened interval as well, but everybody else doesn't necessarily have a shortened interval. So the province has, and through obviously the science tables, make that determination, and we will follow what the province obviously advises. And if there are more that will be added, I think what we will probably continue to do, and I look to Dr. Wang, but obviously the planning group for the task force will look at what we already have set in place. So we have a form set in place. So for instance, not to make this more winded than I already have, if you needed to change your vaccine appointment, staying within your 4 months, for instance, because the date you have for your second one doesn't work for you for whatever reason, you can fill out that same form and they'll adjust your appointment. So we will likely use that same process should other groups become eligible for the shortened interval.
So with all the information out there, it seemed to me that as the supply starts to increase, which it's going to be happening in the region, all indications. I just thought that it would be being able to transition people closer to the middle of the summer as opposed to the end summer. So that's not part of the game plan at all.
Dr. Wang, would you like to add to that answer?
Not at this time, because we are still trying to get a lot of first doses in, maybe later in the summer.
So a lot of people ask about that, but I think that's good clarification. And I'm certainly not complaining. I'm just trying to understand when I get these questions. I think it's important. We just encourage everybody to get the shot, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Rentz. Councillor Galloway.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And Dr. Wang, again, congratulations on the presentation of the prayer shawl this morning. I was able to be on the breakfast call at the time, and very proud that one of our own received that. It's quite an honor, as you know. And also congratulations. Today we went over 50% first doses, and I mention that specifically because I read a report that sometime in the next week or so, Canada will surpass the US in terms of first doses. And the reason, even though they've had almost unlimited supply, and we've had much more limited supply, and of course they have a lot more second doses than we do, but is the hesitancy issue that they're dealing with. And there's one state now that has got $1 million lottery going for anybody who signs up for a vaccination. They get put into the lottery. And I don't think we're going to have quite the same problem, because down in the States, of course, we know that there's been some politicization of vaccinations and so on. And it's a bit of a different situation, but they have kind of hit a bit of a hesitancy wall that they're trying to work through to get to that 75 or 80% level. It's likely we're going to hit a wall too at some point in time, I suspect. And I'm wondering what Health Canada, Ontario Health, or even our own public health organization, have people started to turn their minds to when we might hit that wall? Deputy Chief Hilton just said we've reached 75% and close to 75% in a couple age categories, but we must have some hesitancy in those categories because they have been eligible for quite some time, those particular age categories. So it's probably not something we need to employ immediately, but will we have a strategy? Will Health Canada, Ontario Health, or even our own public health have a strategy to deal with that when we kind of get to that point?
So, Councillor Galloway, I was getting all excited thinking you were going to offer to fund $1 million lottery in case we ran up to hesitancy in Waterloo Region. Dr. Wang is probably happy to start, and I don't know if Connie McDonald is on, but she may like to augment as well.
Yeah, I'll start. So there are tables that are looking at this at the both at the federal as well as the provincial level to provide some expert advice on what communities can do, public health organizations that are operating locally can do to try to encourage more vaccination if we start to see that the demand is starting to die down. Right now, I'm seeing the same thing as you. The demand is still quite healthy. In fact, much greater than is the supply still at this time. But as Deputy Hilton said, we are anticipating more vaccine. And so hopefully it won't be too long from now when we can really, give the vaccines to everyone who would like to have one. So yeah, there are minds that have started turning to this to provide some evidence-informed guidance on measures that could increase vaccine uptake. And I'll see if Connie would like to add anything.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. Connie, go ahead.
Thank you. I read a really great quote from a leader in another community who talked about how, the data tells us where we need to pay attention, and it's community that tells us what we need to do. And I think that that's an approach that we've taken in looking and addressing vaccine hesitancy. And we're fortunate to have really good data to be able to tell where we're being able to vaccinate people. We're able to drill down into where we're having greater success than others. And I think as we get sort of closer to that line, we'll continue to have conversations with community leaders and community members to help us identify strategies moving forward. And I think that's been an important part of our approach, and will continue to be absolutely vital as we get to the home stretch of rolling out the vaccine.
Councillor Galloway, do you have any further comments or questions?
No, that's it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Strickland.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thanks to Shuli and Deputy Hilton for the great work that you're doing. And it just strikes me that on one hand, we're continuing to battle the spread of COVID through all the public health measures that we could put into place. On the other hand, we're really rolling out the vaccination. So hopefully we're going to be able to meet some point where we're at that real sweet spot in terms of declining cases and maximum number of vaccinations. So I think it's really encouraging to see that. And I think it's also a testimonial to our citizens. I mean, we put the infrastructure in place. You've done a great job, but it's our citizens who are lining up to get vaccinated. And so that vaccine hesitancy isn't quite there yet. And hopefully we don't have to deal with that anytime soon. But the citizens deserve a lot of credit for rolling up their sleeves and getting the jab. My questions are related to second doses. I'm just wondering, it's good to see that the vaccination supply chain has improved and is a little more consistent, but what about second doses getting a different brand than the first? Are we still having, if you get Pfizer, your second dose should be Pfizer, if you get Moderna, your second dose should be Moderna, or is there going to be some flexibility around that so we can increase the pace in which we vaccinate people based on supply?
Sounds like a Dr. Wang question to me.
Yeah, thank you. I understand that we should have some national expert advice coming soon on the question of mixing and matching vaccines. And then after that, the province of Ontario will make policy decisions on whether, for example, to allow people to choose their vaccine for the second dose, depending on what they receive for their first dose. We're generally, I think, thinking about AstraZeneca. People who have received AstraZeneca, whether or not they can have a different vaccine like Moderna or Pfizer. And so right now, we're waiting for results of studies that are being done internationally to look at both the safety of the mixing as well as the efficacy. Does it lead to similarly good effectiveness like we see with 2 doses of the same vaccine, or potentially even better, less, or is it less effective, in which case it probably wouldn't be recommended. So because we're sort of waiting for those trial results, I believe that's one of the reasons that it hasn't come yet. But I understand that it should come soon from the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, after which Ontario would then roll out its policy decision about what to offer people for their second doses.
Okay,
Generally, though, if it's Pfizer, if it's Pfizer or Moderna, people are recommended to get the same vaccine, but it's possible these recommendations may also include, in addition to AstraZeneca, recommendations about second doses for Pfizer and Moderna as well.
Okay, so currently the recommendation is still to get the second shot the same as the first, and that may change. I know there was some preliminary positive study results out of the UK that were published in the Globe and Mail this morning. But for now, still second dose the same as the first until further advised by the science table. And then if that happens, that's going to create a whole other level of complexity, I guess, in terms of your vaccination rollout and people's choices. So it's interesting, and I think of it. The bottom line is that if it allows us to get folks vaccinated, fully vaccinated more quickly. I think this is something we're going to have to figure out. My second question is for the deputy, and that is, I received some comments from folks. I mean, that announcement came out last week, and you referred to it in your remarks about, certain designated healthcare workers, et cetera, who had appointments scheduled beyond June 14th for their second dose could register to get their second dose earlier. I got some feedback from folks who said that when they did that, they were a little taken aback that their original vaccination date beyond June 14th was canceled. So basically the system says, okay, your original date beyond June 14th is canceled. Wait to hear from us when your next one is. So I don't know if there's anything that can be done about that, but people were kind of like, well, why should I register earlier for uncertainty when I know I have a date maybe later in June or early in July that's certain? So I'm just wondering if you can maybe comment on that. Do these folks should they be concerned about that, or is there confidence in the system that if you book to get an earlier one, that you should be advised and you will get an earlier one than what you had previously had scheduled?
Deputy Hilton?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, there is assurance that they will get the earlier appointment, and the reason for the cancellation is so that we don't have a double booking for the individual as well, so that we could open up their original appointment for somebody else. But there is assurances that they will get the shortened appointment.
Yeah, okay, and that's the message that I was giving. But you have to trust the system.
That's correct.
That's the bottom line, because you have to trust the system. So I think that's important, as we move through this, that the system's working quite well. Our pre-registration system, I think, is best in class, and you have to trust the system and register and do whatever you can if you're in the right group to get that vaccination and that second dose as soon as possible. So thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Councillor Bravanovich, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair Redmond, and like the others, I too would like to echo my thanks to you, Dr. Wang, and to you, Deputy Hilton, and your teams for the great work that they're doing. Dr. Wang, congratulations to you on the presentation of the shawl, and Deputy Hilton, I know behind you there's been others, including Inspector Davis, who just got promoted today. And others that we certainly want to express our thanks to those members of the Waterloo Regional Police Service who have been supporting you in the work that you're doing. I do have a couple questions, and if I understood correctly, Deputy Hilton, when you were talking earlier, you were saying that those in the 12 to 40-year-old age group could anticipate waiting 4 to 6 weeks, if I understood correctly. And then which leads to my question is, what about those over 40? I know, and because we're getting this question, people who are saying, I've been in the system 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and people I know who have registered after me are getting their invite for appointments, and I'm not, and did I do something wrong, and so on. And so, up till now, the threshold we've used has been, okay, if you're in sort of this age group, if you've been more than 6 weeks, you should call. There's probably something wrong. But now it's sounding like perhaps 6 weeks shouldn't be that threshold anymore, particularly for people over 40. So I'm wondering if you can provide any advice to us in terms of how to best handle those calls.
Deputy Hilton?
Thank you. So those in the age group of between 18 and 49, and then those between 12 and 17, they are the newest groups that we've opened pre-registration for. So they will not have received an invitation to book. And so all of the other eligibility groups, not everybody has been invited quite yet. So it goes in batches of the invitations and through the prioritization. What I would suggest and/or recommend is, I don't believe that we've had anybody past the 6 week mark. yet waiting for a vaccine appointment. And so what I would suggest is if there anybody that has been sitting in pre-registration for that length of time, to connect with our Service First call center, because something may have been a mishap, whether it's you know, an error in an email address or a telephone number or a glitch on the pre-registration system. But to date, from what my knowledge is, we haven't had anybody wait past the 6-week mark to be invited for booking. Now, to your point around, there may be some people who are in the same age category and somebody gets invited before somebody else, and that's just really a sweep. It's because you registered on Friday and somebody else registered, you know, the Friday before, doesn't mean the Friday before gets the invite if they're the same eligibility grouping, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay. So I would have always figured that people would have, if you were a earlier cohort, you would have jumped to the front of the queue. But if you were sort of in the same cohort, that date of registration would have had some sort of impact there. So it, in fact, may not, is what you're saying, correct?
Yeah, so it would be definitely in the the age grouping, not necessarily the date in which you register, if you're within the same cohort, as you said. Mm-hmm.
Okay. The question I have is, people who are in those younger age groups, and they're now hearing that in other jurisdictions. We know, for example, that vaccine supply has been increased in the hot zones. Makes a whole lot of sense. I think it was a wise decision. But people are asking, because we can only pre-register here and we can actually register for an appointment somewhere else, should we be doing that? And, my advice has been, no. I mean, the system's designed for you to get your vaccine in your health unit at the appropriate time based on, all of these various factors. Are we going to get to a point where, those other folks, like where we won't be taking pre-registrations anymore, and in fact, people will be able to just directly start booking appointments and getting a certain peace of mind with that?
Deputy Hilton?
Thank you. I suspect we will get to that point where we won't require that pre-registration, because really the pre-registration was to assist us with the prioritization and to make sure that we had opened up to the potential prioritization framework, and then allowed us to stay within an equitable approach to ensuring people did receive their vaccines. So sorry, somebody was just trying my door, and so I apologize for that.
No worries.
So I do suspect we will get past pre-registration when we have that increase in vaccine supply, where we won't be required to do that, where people will just automatically book on a booking system. We're not quite there yet, but as we move into phase 3, I see us getting to that point. And I see Dr. Wang's hand. Dr.
Wang, go ahead.
I just want to mention that you can call it a pre-reg system or registration system, but it's actually helped us, or it's been an advantage for us to have it, because we're able to continue to prioritize groups as per the provincial framework. So those at greater risk, those that are older, continue to be prioritized, versus a booking system that is just open to, the first person that can book on a system. And it doesn't actually put us behind in any way. So other places may open bookings to an eligible group, like recently 18 plus was open to bookings, but many health units, you weren't able to book for a few weeks. Like it was booked out, right? So it didn't mean because you're eligible to book, you can get a booking right away. It just means you're eligible to go in now and book, and it was often, weeks later. Whereas because we have a pre-registration system, we can continue to send out invites to those that are in the highest priorities first, always. But in addition to that, it allows us to modulate the booking so that we can keep our clinics relatively full. So the issue sometimes we hear about clinics half full or even less full on certain days, or because there is no control in terms of the bookings, right? So you can have sometimes clinics running with not a lot of people coming in, and that's not a very good efficient use of resources. Whereas because we have this pre-registration or registration system and we have people in the queue, and when we have bookings, we can really fill those spots efficiently and fill our clinics very well. And so I think I agree with Deputy Hilton. I think eventually, when we don't have a need for to continue to prioritize groups, to ensure that groups that were always prioritized continue to be prioritized as opposed to whoever's fastest on their computer, and when we don't have this issue of having to really maximize clinic attendance and things like that, we can move to a system where people can register themselves. But I think for the time, I think it will become a more apparent as we go on when we can start to transition to that kind of model. Right. But at any rate, it doesn't actually disadvantage us. We do send out, we try to send out bookings closer. What I mean is, for those that are in the priority groups and that should be prioritized, they do tend to get their bookings earlier. So they don't, tend to wait 4 to 6 weeks.
No, and to be explicitly clear on this, I actually think the reviews has been very good and helpful for the reasons that you've outlined, and the fact that we've been able to, reprioritize 80-year-olds ahead of, 2-year-olds makes a whole lot of sense as an example. Particularly if they registered later. I think it's more helping people understand the process, the logic, and when things may change, because people being what they are. Everybody wants to know. It's kind of like that dentist appointment 3 months from now, right? I want to know I have it. I put it on my calendar, and then I've got peace of mind. Sort of thing going forward. Well, thank you again for all you're doing.
Thank you. Councillor Kiefer, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. Wang and Deputy Hilton, for the work you're doing, of course, on an ongoing basis. Congratulations, Dr. Wang, on your prayer shawl presentation this morning. Deputy Hilton, I think my question is for Deputy Hilton. I listened to your response that you had for Councillor Lorenz, and I think I understood it, but I need some clarity. Let's say if you're in a high risk group and you've already had your first shot and you're scheduled for your second shot. Did I get it? Did I hear you right that you can't reapply for a quicker time frame, or you will not be contacted for a quicker time frame? I wasn't sure I heard that right. So I'm talking about a high risk Deputy Hilton, high risk group, elderly, let's say, and they've got their date for their second shot, but with the added vaccines now coming in, the extra supply, I heard Dr. Wang mention that it's going to groups so that I haven't had their first shot yet too, but I'm just wondering if you could clarify that for me.
Deputy, you may want to take a shot at it, but it looks like Dr. Wang's happy to jump into.
Yeah, just to kind of build on what Deputy Hilton said. So right now, even though we're getting more vaccines, there's still a very large amount of people to whom we need to offer a first dose. So based on the anticipated supply for the next month and a half, maybe more, the province looks at and move certain groups into the category of being able to shorten their interval between the first and second dose. So right now, it's only a select group of people. So people with very, very severe health conditions, very significant, like have cancer, undergoing active chemo, or the category of highest risk health workers. So not just any health worker, but highest risk health workers, like those that work in ICUs and things like that. But as for the general, for example, the general population that may be older or that may have a health condition, right now, their second dose has not been moved up because we do not anticipate in the near future that we will have enough doses to do all those first doses plus move up all those second doses. But perhaps later in the summer, once we've done the first doses that we want to as many people as we're who would like a first dose, then I think we can move up. We will have enough supply then to start to move up some other people's second doses.
Thank you, Dr. Wang, for clarifying that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Deputy Hilton.
Thank you, Councillor Kiefer. Councillor Jowett.
Thanks, Chair Redmond, and I appreciate all the questions for sure. I have one that's not in our lane, and I apologize, but I'm hoping that you're going to keep your ear to the ground and let us know, because we talk about vaccine hesitancy, and I'm a little bit trying to understand if it's an incentive or maybe it's not, but still I think people are asking and want to know, are we looking at an app that certifies vaccination for travel and large events? Are we hearing anything on the ground about that yet? Is it still too soon?
So Dr. Wang?
Yeah, well, we do know that the federal government is working with other countries to land on some common certification criteria to certify that somebody has been fully immunized. Because there's, different vaccines around the world, and there's different protocols for the vaccines. And so, different, what I mean is different, when do people get their second dose and things like that. So, that's being looked at the federal level right now. With respect to whether there's going to be more requirements for someone to prove they've been immunized for other purposes besides travel, I haven't heard of any provincial policy decisions with respect to that.
I'm just going to throw a quick comment out there. It might be an incentive if we start reaching a wall where we can't get people to vaccinate, because I know everybody wants to travel. And I just wanted to say again, congratulations for your prayer shawl, and certainly thanks to both of you and the teams that you lead in all of this. As usual, you've done us proud, and thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you, Councillor Jowett. Councillor Clarke, I had your hand up and then it appears to have gone down. Do you have a question? Okay, thank you. Councillor Erb, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to Dr. Wang and Deputy Hilton, thank you for your steady and consistent messaging to the community and to Council through this whole period. I think it's been very, very reassuring to all of us. I think if memory serves me correct, that the highest number of vaccinations in a day was 62 or 6,300, which I think is quite remarkable given the uneven supply of vaccines that we've been getting. I know the goal was 10,000, and I'm wondering, with the increased supply of vaccines that we're hearing about, do we think we may be able to get past that 6,400 or whatever the number was in the coming months?
Dr. Wang?
Yes, I'm just trying to pull up what our maximum was. I think it was about 5,500 doses a day, and that did include doses from pharmacies. And today we had our second highest number in a day, 5,500 doses. And that also included vaccine given out by pharmacies as well as individual primary care offices. So I think with the vaccine supply that we're going to get, I think what we'll see is really something more regular in the 6,000 range for the next several weeks. Just because, you know, I don't think we would be getting right now in territory of, you know, 7,000 or 8,000 a day, just based on what we anticipate for our supply in the coming weeks. But that's still going to be pretty significant because that is quite high compared to, you know, the average, let's say, over the time period that we've had access to vaccines. And, you know, that kind of output will get us to close to 65% of our adults by the end of the month, and get us even further in June. So I don't think we'll ever hit 10,000 a day, just because I don't think the supply will be there, at least in the more in the coming weeks, and probably by the time we have a lot of supply or maximum amount of supply, there will be multiple channels per day. Sorry, multiple channels where the supply can be given out in a day. And so I don't think the clinics, the large public clinics will ever hit 10,000, but I think there will just be more and more vaccine available, and it will become more convenient for people, you know, to get their second dose, to get their first dose if they haven't gotten it, starting later on this summer and going into the fall.
I apologize for using the wrong number. Whatever the number is, thank you for the work.
It's okay.
Any further questions or comments, Councillor Erb?
No, just saying a little bit of exaggeration helps.
I just would like to, in just a response to some of the questions, just tear a page out of Mr. Lochner's book and say that any vaccine in an arm is a win, is a victory. And it's wonderful to see this vaccine rollout. And Councillor Vrvanovich, when you were talking about sort of people getting antsy waiting, this is it's probably about a week old, but I investigated somebody who had a lot of umbrage because somebody had enrolled in pre-registration and gotten their registration before this person. This person had pre-registered 7 times. And it was at a period of time when his cohort, about 98% of the people who were invited to register got their dose or their shot within a 3-week period. So I understand that it's frustrating, and I understand that people are frustrated for a whole lot of reasons and short on patience. But I think some people think the more they pre-register, the faster it gets them up in the queue, and that's not how it works. And I know that's not what you were intimating, but I thought it was quite interesting that somebody would sit there and just hit the pre-registration button that often. So it's not without its challenges. And again, on behalf of the community, thank you, Dr. Wang. Thank you, Deputy Hilton. And for that, after that update, we will move on. We have some delegations today. So before commencing with hearing from delegations, I'd like to remind all delegates of some guidelines for participation. Please leave your video and camera turned off and your microphone audio muted until you are called on to speak. Delegations will have 5 minutes to speak. We also ask that you leave the meeting once your issue has been addressed, and you are then welcome to watch the remainder of the meeting on webcast via YouTube. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manner, it will result in immediate removal from the meeting: interrupting councillors, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about councillors, staff, or others, turning on your camera at inappropriate times, or hate speech or any defamatory comments. I would now call upon the delegations as they are listed in the agenda. First is William Turman from Kitchener, and he is going to speak to Affordable Housing Framework, A Better Future. This report was dealt with May 11th, And Mr. Turman, I offer my apologies. I understand that you didn't receive the link in time, so we're happy to hear your comments now, even though it's not the date that you wanted to register. Please, you have the floor and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is William Turman, and I am here, as our chair was saying, to speak on the subject of the affordable housing framework. I am a graduate of the University of Waterloo Masters in Urban Planning program, specialized in housing and equity. My supervisor, Martine August, researches how housing is becoming a financial tool, and I performed my own research on housing communities in Kitchener. I performed research in the City of Toronto concerning stability for homeless populations. And this past year, I have been speaking with people with experiences of displacement in KW as part of a project between Brian Doucette from UW and the Social Development Center. I am a participant in the Unsheltered campaign. I am also a low-income person and a renter in Kitchener. I am familiar with what it looks like to search for affordable housing. First of all, I commend the region on its commitment of funds to produce affordable housing. 2,500 units in 5 years seems very ambitious. Additionally, a multi-pronged approach is very important for resolving the housing crisis. The 4 prongs suggested in the framework include a public land portfolio, a formal RFP process for producing affordable housing, a community engagement plan, and appropriate staffing, which are all really great places to start. This framework, however, is neither ambitious nor broad enough. There is a long-term need for thousands of affordable units, and 2,500 only barely scratches the surface in the need for affordable housing. Like Bisan Zubi said last week, the framework as proposed seems like triage rather than a cure to housing. Housing advocates are calling for several achievable, affordable, and life-saving interventions by all levels of government that are not mentioned here, and which remain barriers for sustainable housing. Resolving the housing crisis is just as much about a failure of our current land use policies as it is about a lack of money. It's not easy to overstate the housing crisis, especially in particular for the landless. The potential 2,500 affordable units in 5 years are not even enough to house the 6,000 or so who are on the Waterloo Region Housing's wait list. It is likely that many more are not on the wait list who could be. In the next 5 years, new development will displace existing affordable units, and the market price for housing will go up as well, pushing more people into the need for affordable housing. Even the definition of affordable is skewed. Current definitions of affordable housing tie its price to some percentage of market rent. By this standard, an affordable unit that's valued at maybe 80% of average rent would still be around $1,150, or the entire income afforded by disability payments. Current asking developers to include 5 or so affordable units only barely replaces the ones that were there before, and there is no guarantee that those who are evicted to redevelop those units will be able to return if they are replaced. Additionally, there is an immediate need for shelter. For the up to 700 people on the streets in Waterloo Region, winter can be deadly, police enforcement can be harmful, and life without security and stability is traumatic. For many, housing without supports is not enough, and for others, there may always be a distrust of emergency shelters and support, and for whom it is preferable to be out in a tent. As we have seen at Lot 42, we can provide healthy and affordable shelter on a very short notice. To do this, all levels of government need to sanction encampments, and we need to decriminalize homelessness. So my purpose here today is not to undermine the affordable housing framework. Instead, I want to encourage Regional Council and the staff implementing the framework to be more ambitious in depth and breadth of possible approaches, as there is no one-size-fits-all solution. I will suggest 5 additional prongs for the framework. 1, data collection. We don't even really have a great idea how many units we are losing from redevelopment and renovations. It would be of utmost importance to collect this data and keep track of evictions and renovictions. Make this data public and available to everyone. 2, protect existing tenants. The best affordable housing is what already exists. Put measures in place to protect it and the tenants. An example could be like a bylaw that they have put in place in New Westminster, BC, or supporting tenants who are facing eviction at the LTB. 3, explore different forms of social housing provision. This could include co-ops, community land trust, all-day shelters, and co-housing. 4, increase taxes on bad actors. Examples of this could be a vacant house tax or a foreign buyer tax. And 5, zoning and official plan reform. Make it easier to build affordable housing in more places in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your thoughtful presentation and your impeccable timing. You got right down to the wire. Councillor Clarke, please go ahead.
Very much, William. You may have already shared your presentation with clerks, but if you haven't, can I ask that you do that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clarke. Councillor Erb.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Mr. Turman, for being diligent on this and coming back a second time to share your thoughts with us. And I think what we need to continually hear is from people like you in the community who are dealing with the consequences of a lack of affordable housing, and that you continually and others remind us of the work that's ahead of us. We know it's a big challenge, but we need to make it aspirational, which I think you're saying. And so thank you, and continue to keep reminding us that we can reach the goal that so that everybody who needs this housing, we can provide it for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Turman. And again, apologies that you weren't able to be here with other speakers and to deal with the report, although we will be confirming it tonight later on. So thank you for coming back. I see no further questions. The next delegation is Mike Morrice to address item 17, Councillor Jim Erb's notice of motion regarding placement of election signs on property owned by the Regional Municipality of Waterloo. Welcome, Mike. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, Regional Council. Thanks for the chance to chat with you all this evening. I'm here tonight to speak in support of Councillor Erb's notice of motion, directing staff to bring back to Council a report on eliminating the placement of election signs on property owned by the region, with my support particularly in relation to federal and provincial candidates. I'd like to offer my perspective as a former federal candidate and to share input I've heard from our community over the past week on this topic. During my campaign in 2019 as a first-time candidate, I earned a significant jump in support, more than 13,000 votes over my party's previous candidate in 2015. And I don't attribute much, if any, of this to the use of signs on regional roads. Instead, I believe the difference was made by the relationships I've built over the past 2 decades, conversations at kitchen tables across our community, and the volunteers that joined me in knocking on tens of thousands of doors across the riding. That being said, because signs on regional roads were permitted, my campaign was forced into participating in what felt like an arms race, securing signs in the most spots possible. We spent time and money on putting them out when the writ dropped, and throughout the campaign, maintaining those that were removed or defaced. While there are clear instructions on where election signs can and cannot go, my team noticed that these rules were not followed by all candidates. And as Councillor Erb's notice mentions, no doubt significant regional resources are diverted to enforcing these rules. Further, for residents who look to lawn signs as a measure of community support, as some residents give permission for signs on their lawn or in their apartment windows, allowing signs on regional roads can give residents a distorted perception of local support. In my case, we actually ran out of large lawn signs to give to residents requesting them in 2019, in part because of those allocated to locations on regional roads. As a first-time candidate, I would have much rather focused our time and energy on residents than on these unearned sign placements. It's also a wasteful practice, as pointed out by Councillor Erb in his notice of motion. Secondly, I'd like to share with Council input I've heard from our community over the past week on this topic. Residents seem to be both engaged and overwhelmingly supportive of Councillor Erb's motion. On Twitter, I see nearly universal support, including "best news I've heard in a while," Across dozens and dozens of comments, I note only 2 dissenting opinions from people that may have misunderstood the ban to include private property, and 1 community member concerned with the advantage this change may create for candidates whose supporters are in a position to permit lawn or window signs. On the r/Kitchener subreddit, in response to a 570 news story I posted on this topic, this post had the highest engagement of any in the past week, with 34 of 35 comments supportive. And again, the lone dissenting opinion was a person who misunderstood this ban to include private property. The top comments included, "They're so wasteful," and "Good, I'm tired of seeing them lining Fountain Street in the Breslau area, and 1/3 of them being left by one party to be picked up by the yearly community roadside trash cleanup." 98% of the hundreds of residents that engaged with the post upvoted it, indicating their support. I'd like to also note that in my conversations with Kitchener councillors on this topic over the past week, some have raised the possibility of referring this for review to the region's diversity, equity, and inclusion team and/or the region's anti-racism advisory working group. I absolutely see the benefit in doing so to ensure that any changes considered are reviewed with an anti-racist lens and that changes don't negatively impact equity-deserving candidates marginalized by our community. Finally, if Regional Council is interested in improving our democracy and leveling the playing field for first-time candidates, I'd encourage you to consider advocating to the province to allow municipalities to move to an electoral system that is more representative. For example, a ranked ballot or any form of proportional representation. As well, Dave Meslin's recent book, Tear Down, Rebuilding Democracy from the Ground Up, contains a number of additional suggestions for improving local democracies, and I highly recommend it. I hope this helps inform your decision tonight, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mike. Are there any questions of the delegation? I see none, but thank you very much again for your thoughtful intervention and how timely. So thank you.
Thanks for your time.
So we do have a motion. We also have had some correspondence that before we deal with the motion, Scott Steger-Piakowski sent us some correspondence in support of Councillor Erb's motion, as well as John and Susan Hedge, H-E-I-J, Hedge. Anyway, so I just draw your attention to those 2 pieces of correspondence that relate to this. Councillor Erb, would you like to bring your notice of motion forward? It is moved by you and seconded by Councillor Galloway. Do you want to speak to it?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I would. And first, I want to thank my council colleagues for agreeing to defer this notice of motion from our previous meeting, so it could be debated tonight at an earlier hour and an agenda that is not quite as full, but I'm not sure if the notice of motion or the timing is a sign of what this issue is all about. However, we're here. I recognize that there were revisions to this bylaw in 2007, which I assumed consumed considerable staff time and debate. However, during the last municipal election, when I was out campaigning as a first-time candidate and noticed proliferation of signs on regional roads, a number of residents wondered how long this had to continue. And I promised some of them that if I was elected, I'd ask Regional Council to reconsider the bylaw. And that's why I brought it before. I do not think election signs belong on public property at the expense of the taxpayer and where they do not represent any meaningful support for a local candidate. Highlighted in the report that the Clerk's Department presented on April the 13th is that there's a significant expense to the taxpayer in the last municipal election, with 2 enforcement officers assigned to deal with the election signage and spending removing 684 signs that were improperly placed. If 35 hours is a typical work week, that's 10 weeks of staff time responding to complaints, plus the removal of improperly placed signs just for the municipal election. There's a good possibility that we'll have a federal election this fall, and we know there'll be a provincial election in the spring of 2022 and a municipal one in the fall. With these three elections, rights of way through the region of Waterloo will be cluttered with signs generating significant enforcement time for staff in the clerk's department. Because of the number of candidates, the provincial and federal elections will not require as many staff hours as do municipal elections. However, the clutter along our picturesque countryside and urban roads will be equally evident. I can just imagine the relief and delight there would be in the clerk's department if they didn't have to contend with the multiple complaints and enforcement of the labor-intensive election bylaw and using months of valuable staff time policing the placement of election signs. And these months of staff time do not take into consideration at all the aggravation it takes for regional staff to do maintenance, such as mowing and trimming around these signs, and just the general appearance of uncut clutter along our roadways. And after the election, too many signs are not removed for an extended period of time. And for many candidates, especially those who are not elected, signs end up in our landfill site. The signs that are used by most candidates today are made from a product called chloroplast, which is not biodegradable and cannot be recycled. In our current strategic plan, the third focus area and strategic objective is titled Environment and Climate Action. And the 8 initiatives in this section, the fourth action, and I quote, says reduce, reuse, and recycle, including a ban on plastics and direct more waste away from our landfill, end of quote. The reduce part is simple. Ban election signs on regional property. If you're an incumbent, you have the advantage to reuse the signs. But with chloroplast, no one can comply to the recycle part. The sentence which reads a ban on plastics and direct more waste away from our landfill is pretty clear. And so I think if we are really serious about increasing the life of our very own regional landfill site and reducing the use of plastics, one of the concrete steps we could take personally as regional councillors is eliminating the number of election signs and prolong its life. Opposite to what some might argue, I think election signs on municipal property give a distinct advantage to incumbents. From their involvement in previous elections, incumbents know that where the best locations are, the rules, and usually have the volunteers and resources to getting the signs up first. Election signs are a significant expense, and incumbents are usually in a better position to raise the money and consequently outsign first-time candidates because they already have signs in inventory from previous elections and don't need to raise the money. First-time candidates, on the other hand, need to purchase 100% of their signs, which can be a significant financial barrier and deterrent to potential first-time candidates. In the last municipal election, while I was made aware of the time frame for when signs could be put up and taken down in the clerk's department, I didn't realize that incumbents who have done all of this before would be out bright and early the first day and secure the best locations, leaving leftovers for first-time candidates. When I drove out of our subdivision the first morning after election signs were permitted to be placed in 2018, to me, it felt like game over. All the prime places were filled with signs from incumbents. And if I decide to seek re-election in 2022 as an incumbent, I now have an unfair advantage over first-time candidates, which I don't think is fair. I have a garage full of signs from 2018 that are paid for, and now, better knowing the drill, can get my signs out bright and early on the first day. For me, a level playing field for candidates, whether incumbents or first time, is placement of signs on private property only. Election signage should be a sign of support and not distorted by a proliferation of signage on public property. Elections should be decided by meaningful public engagement at the door and other public settings, not on public property. All candidates have an equal opportunity to knock on doors and communicate with the voter, rather than trying to outsign other candidates on public property. And candidates that are in wards that are in the core of municipalities do not have the advantage of regional roads for signage and are at a disadvantage. From my experience as a volunteer in federal, provincial, and municipal elections where I manage multiple campaigns, I am not aware of any research that suggests election signs on public property translate into voter support. However, that support is significant for private property. The strategy was always to get signs on private property that would show committed support. The reality of the situation is that the more candidates we have, especially during municipal elections, when there are elections for school and municipal councils, the more signs there are. And all candidates, whether they think signs should be on public property, get caught up in trying to keep up with the competition. In the last municipal election, I self-righteously began the campaign by saying I was only going to put signs on private property. But as the campaign progressed, the pressure mounted from family and friends to place signs on municipal right-of-ways. And consequently, I caved into the clutter on public property. Before the campaign began, I had secured approximately 200 sign locations on private property and had an allowance for another 75 locations that might be offered to me during the campaign, and structured my budget accordingly. When I caved in and decided to put signs on public property, I had to place a rush order for more signs and significantly increase my budget. This is 2021. And with Waterloo region being recognized as the global leader in high-tech innovation, are election signs on municipal property something that is still embraced by voters who want to make an informed decision on which candidate they might support? Have we moved past this clutter on public property to other possibilities? What if municipalities, including the region of Waterloo, explored the possibility of hosting a link for each candidate where they could post their printed material and community members could read and make an informed decision? This would help candidates who are not able to knock on all doors in their respective ward or municipality. And it could help us reduce the waste of money spent purchasing signs, times, and clutter. And more important, create a level playing field for all candidates, whether incumbent or first time. I can't imagine there is any candidate or other volunteers who love pounding signs into hard clay ground on the shoulder of a busy road on a windy, cold day. And while I'm not a lawyer, I can't imagine there is not some liability the region assumes because we permit signs on our property. The clerk's department says 683 signs were removed by regional staff because of illegal placement. Well, I don't want to speculate on what that illegal placement might be. There is a possibility they could have impeded clear sight to a stop sign or a yield from traffic. Or what would the consequences be if a vehicle were stopped along a road, a regional road, while the occupant was installing the sign on regional property and an accident occurred because of the stopped vehicle? Is there the possibility of liability because the region is permitting this activity to take place? With all that being said, I realize there's a possibility of a charter challenge by an individual or group, and I'm sure Ms. Arnold or Mr. Brooks will have some comments on that possibility. However, locally, Kitchener and Waterloo, and provincially, cities such as Barrie, Mississauga, Niagara, and some other municipalities whose names were provided by staff earlier today are some of the municipalities that do not allow election signs on municipal property. And to date, there has been no charter challenges in these municipalities. I don't have firsthand knowledge or history of the decision-making process. However, I don't understand why the region of Waterloo should be inundated with election signs to compensate for Kitchener and Waterloo, as an example, not permitting them on their property. We've always been a leader. And I'd like to see that leadership continue by eliminating the clutter of election signs, as some other municipalities have done, limiting the possibility of liability because of activity on regional property, significantly reducing the use of plastics, and recognizing that this is 2021 and there are more meaningful ways to convey candidates' credentials by creating a level playing field for all incumbents and new candidates. So thank you for allowing me to bring this notice of motion forward and for your consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Erb. I have several speakers. Councillor Galloway, did you want to speak at this point in time as seconder, or do you want to wait and speak later? Okay, thank you. Councillor Lawrence, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I don't know how anybody can top that. Congratulations, Councillor. You had certainly a lot of things to say, and I don't know. I don't have a lot of things to say. As Chair of Licensing, I think this is to be referred back to the Licensing Committee. We should look at it. We should look at our regs. I think you've been in this game a long time. You were out, you were in, and you were out, and now you're back in. And maybe you've seen different light, but when I started in '88, municipal politics is messy business. And when people run from the executive of a neighborhood association or the guy around the corner that has a dream about his community, he can't afford to go out and buy all these signs. We were making them back in the day. We run, you and I run in the city of Kitchener. You think I'm going to go out and knock on 200,000 doors and be able to get lawn signs on people's front yard? That's not going to happen. There's so many contradictions about not putting them on. The city of Kitchener doesn't allow them in the region. The city of Waterloo doesn't allow them in the region. The city of Cambridge does. The townships do. So, you know, we need some kind of a comprehensive plan if we're even going to try to implement this. I've never put a sign on regional right-of-ways. I put them on private property beside the right-of-way. So I don't have any skin in the game when it comes to this, but I've met and worked with young people that really didn't think they'd have a chance, but they wanted to have a say. And when you don't have a name, when you're not in the game as long as you and I have been, and all of us sitting here, it's very tough. And you can't tell me that there's scientific proof that signs don't make a difference. And it doesn't have to be a war. So let's take it back to licensing. Let's regulate this thing probably better. Let's enforce it a little better. They don't put up signs in Kitchener or Waterloo, so we can second their enforcement people to help us. And you're worried about plastics and all this stuff. We spent $500,000 on buying plastic traffic barrels that we don't even own. They're going to get thrown away or recycled at some point. I mean, there's so many different ways to look at this. My view is we need to take a second look at it, and we need to create some kind of a democratic process that we keep taking away people's rights in elections. This is our basic right to be able to vote and for you to be able to get your message out. And it's great to say that, you know, open up a link on social media or post things here. People don't read that stuff. When they walk through the community, they look and they talk, and if they don't like it, maybe they can say to the candidate they're wrong. But in the same token, it has to be, in my view, the person that puts together a campaign, figure out. It's just like anything else, a job, a strategy, and you can make people you're doing the right thing, or you can say that I wouldn't vote for this guy if, because look at the campaign he's running. So there's more to it than that. And when you run for municipal politics or federal, well, certainly provincial and federal, you don't even have to pay. You don't raise money because the party does. But when you run municipally and you're raising your own money, you need to have people buy into your vision and ask for your support before you can even get off the ground. And as soon as you learn all those skills, and if you do get elected, you throw them all out the window because you have to learn how to be in a governance position. So I think it's a challenging thing. I don't even know why I've ever got into the game, but doing it a long time. And I guess I'm just worried over the last year or so. You've seen the whole idea of the degradation of voters' rights and things happening down in the States. And it's a slippery slope. When you start taking people's rights away from, being able to get their message out in only certain ways, I think it's wrong. So my suggestion is we send it back to the committee. We hear the people, get some information from more of the public. We have a discussion. We look at, see what other municipalities. We listed 14 or 15 came out today. There's 444 municipalities in Ontario, and see if we can clean it up. And if we don't, I'm good with that. But I think we need to put a process in place, and just having a few people make a speech and send in some notes isn't good enough for me. We pay people to plow streets. We pay people to paramedics. Everybody has a job, and enforcement is part of it. And to say that because we have these elections every few years that it's too big of an expense, I don't buy it. I think we have to make the system work for us instead of tearing it down. That's my view. So I would move a deferral at some point back to committee if that makes sense to you, Madam Chair.
So, Councillor Morrice, are you moving deferral now?
Well, I don't want to stifle any of the debate, but at some point, yeah, I think it should go back to the licensing and enforcement, for sure, and retail. It hasn't been there. It was just a notice of motion. Unless we're circumventing the committee process.
Councillor, I'm going to turn to the clerk. Does everybody want to speak, and then we'll come back? If this does not receive a seconder, then it fails. So, Mrs. Fletcher, what's your review?
With respect to the notice of motion, you could defer the notice of motion, but you probably need to think about time and what you're referring it to and for what purpose, or else you can vote the existing notice of motion down and then move forward to put a different motion in place. So you have a number of options available to you at this point in time.
So can we refer it back to licensing committee?
Sorry, did you get that? Jeff, say that again, please.
We can't refer it back to the licensing committee for further investigation and public comment, and the licensing.
Yes, you can refer it back to a committee if you want. That would be one of the things that you can do, or you can vote it down and then put another motion on the floor about what you want to do.
Okay, thank you.
So do you want to think about that, Councillor Morrice?
I think it should go back to I think we should just refer it back and see if we can clean it up and get some better public input and see what the recommendation comes. Working with staff, I haven't talked to staff about any of this, either as any of the licensing committee. So this is part of the enforcement policy that is that responsibility, and I that would be my request. And if I get a seconder, we can deal with that. And if it doesn't,
I'd second that, Madam Chair.
Okay, so it's been moved by Councillor Morrice and seconded by Councillor Strickland. So speakers would then talk to the referral time and place. So it goes back to licensing committee. And is there a time frame at all, Councillor Morrice?
Well, I think that would be up to the discussion with the clerk. I don't know how much work needs to be done, but
Point of clarification.
Sorry?
Point of clarification, Madam Chair. I think what Councillor Morrice was trying to do was hold off on the deferral so that people could make their points, and so that we're not just limited to time and place.
I'm good with that as well.
And I'm good with that as well too, but we have a habit of stacking up. Come back to me, I want to put the deferral on. So we at least now know that Councillor Strickland is willing to second it. Councillor Strickland, are you all right if we hold it in abeyance and we listen to the conversation?
Sure, absolutely. And just by the way, time and place, maybe we can have it come back in 2023. Just kidding.
Ha ha. Okay, so I have Councillor Jaworski.
Madam Chair, just with time and place, I mean, I haven't been in the office in almost a year, so I have no idea how things are working over there. So we need to talk about that and figure out how soon we can get through this. I mean, the whole system has changed, so it's not that easy to try to communicate with people. So we need to have a little bit of time to figure that out, I would say.
Okay, so we're going to hold the referral in abeyance, and we will listen to the discussion, and then I'll return to Councillor Rentz. Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you very much through the chair, and thank you to my colleagues for, I think an encouraging debate that we're about to have. When I first heard that this was coming to council, I thought, what are we thinking about? We have just handled this last term of council. Will it stifle discussion and that? And then I reflected, seeing some opinion pieces in the local newspaper, and also the emails that we've received. And I reflected on being an incumbent or a large political party. The signs are plentiful and ready to go. And for upper levels of government, I don't believe the majority of signs are safe for reuse like they are at the lower tier here, due to branding and candidate changes. For lower tiers, newcomers, as Councillor Erb has said, they have to fundraise from scratch, design the signs, get a designer, get them manufactured, get them delivered. An incumbent merely needs to back up their car to their garage, load up, and go put them on public property. And essentially free signs, because as you all know, the cost or the value of the signs is simply a carry forward. There's no fundraising required whatsoever. And although the signage period is 45 days at the municipal level, and then I guess the RIP period at the other levels, the reality is after a handful of days, as Councillor Erb has said, the signs are simply clutter and a distraction to our drivers on our fastest roads versus in the case of City of Waterloo and City of Kitchener, which prohibit it. A sign does not lead to educating voters, and on public land, it really stands for nothing. The pandemic has taught us about the value of technology in the virtual world and the online world, where voters can get real information on options, and that we've seen over the past 18 months, and we'll continue to see that progress as time goes on. I did check with our own city level staff and although we prohibit signs from the office of the clerk, the number one question they get during a municipal election period is, how do I get on the voters list? That's a great question. The number two one is signs. Where can I put them? Where's the regional road? University Ave East or University Ave West? Which is regional? Which is city? That is the second biggest volume of questions at the lower tier, and that's sad to hear, when in fact we want to get people registered and voting and get out the vote, get everybody out to vote, as opposed to 30% or 35% that we see at the municipal level. And then at the bylaw level, I did hear as well that lower tier bylaw officers are very busy, dozens of calls each election period, and many, many more that they don't have to go out to because they spend time calling the candidates, telling them how to fix up their signs. This is where you can put them. This is where you can't. And it's just an inordinate amount of work for something that is really a distraction, having volunteers from all these campaigns, 140 campaigns in the municipal level here in the region of Waterloo, all this time spent putting up signs on public property, when in fact they could be getting the message out and providing valuable information for voters to make educated choices. And for that reason, I plan on supporting Councillor Erb and Councillor Galloway's motion should we get to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jaworski. Councillor Clarke.
Thank you. I do plan to support the motion to refer this to committee, and I would also like to add to the motion that we do have this this possibility looked at from an equity lens. I do take the points about signs and all of the disadvantages of signs, although I believe that they really argue against signs in general and not just signs on regional roads. I don't believe that the purpose of signs is to indicate support. That may be what we interpret when we see them, but the purpose of signs is advertising. It's to get a candidate's name out there. And the research does show that they do work as long as they're strategically located, which means in a high visibility, high traffic area. That's not front lawns. I think all of our conversation around front lawns assumes equal access to front lawns. And I don't believe that all candidates, and here I'm talking about municipal candidates, federal and provincial, it's an entirely different ballgame. They have teams of volunteers, they have money behind them. Most municipal candidates who aren't candidates for mayor or chair, school board trustees, ward councillors and regional councillors are really one-person campaigns. You know, they might have one or two people helping them. Those people are going to be really hard pressed to get out and go door knocking to get sign locations if they have to work, if they're not able to take time off work, if they are lone parents, if they are people with mobility issues. I'm just concerned that this race for front lawns isn't really an even race. I may be wrong, which is why I would like to have this looked at with that diversity and equity lens. So I don't know whether that's our staff EDI unit. I don't know whether that's the anti-racism team, but I would like the information to come back, and I would feel a lot more comfortable supporting the motion when the time comes if I knew that people who are perhaps disadvantaged as candidates aren't going to find this a further disadvantage. I think that's what I have to say. I don't really care what the public has to say, only because I think we know what the public has to say. We heard it from Mike Morrice. We heard it from Councillor Erb. You know, we know the public hates these signs. But that's not the point.
So, Councillor Clarke, I have to say I have a level of discomfort having this motion to refer that isn't on the table, but I will come back to you if you want to amend that motion to defer. And you're suggesting the equity, diversity and inclusion group or the anti-racism advisory working group may be two places where your amendment might find some guidance.
Yeah, and I would believe this is a friendly amendment. It's simply an additional piece of research that I would like us to take into consideration.
Okay, I see the mover shaking his head and the seconder, so we'll assume that that is a friendly amendment then. Councillor Strickland.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I support wholeheartely what Councillor Clarke has just said. And, you know, the arguments that I've heard so far in support of a regional road sign bylaw speak more to campaign management and maybe an aversion to clutter. This is about a lot more than that. And just in terms of context, we've amended our sign bylaw twice in the last two election cycles, 2014, 2017. And I think we have a very effective sign bylaw in place right now. We severely limited the amount of time that's required for bylaw officers, and also we reduced the amount of signs that are on a lawn. So we use best in practice evaluation. We looked at other municipalities and we put into place which I think is a very stringent bylaw, which is an effective compromise, which I think is also part of the DNA in Waterloo Region. And you know, to make an argument that our bylaw staff have to work a little extra harder every 4 years for 45 days. You know, I think that's a small price to pay for democracy in terms of allowing people to put signs on regional right-of-ways. And we've talked about incumbency, and I have a completely different view on incumbency than what Councillor Erb has said. Like, I just want to just quote a couple of studies here. And we all know Jack Lucas from the University of Calgary. He emails us, his grad students email us about filling surveys of municipal politics. And he's done a study in 2019 about the power of incumbency. It's the most comprehensive review of municipal elections in Canadian history from 1874 to 2018. And he says that municipal incumbency, that there's a 30% point advantage to an incumbent. A 30% point advantage to an incumbent. So imagine starting a federal or provincial election as a running for premier or running for prime minister, and you got a 30-point advantage over your competition. It says that candidates who seek re-election in Canadian municipalities almost always win. In most municipalities, large cities in Ontario have a high 80 to 90% range of winning. Incumbent success rates in Canadian cities are stunningly high. So, when you look at that and you look at the opportunity for a cost-effective lawn sign, many candidates buy advertising on radio. Many candidates buy advertising on newspapers. Most candidates can't afford that, but they can afford a lawn sign because it's a very cost-effective way to advertise. And that's what it's really about. And it's about name recognition. Jack Lucas's study goes on to talk about name recognition and how important that is for municipal candidates to get recognized and to have people potentially vote for them. There's some other studies I could point to about signs specifically. There was a study done in New York, and most of this literature around municipal signs and municipal elections is done from the States, except for Mr. Lucas's reference that I made earlier. A study in New York's Binghamton University says that while signs didn't boost voter turnout appreciably, campaign signs did help with name recognition. Like, when you have such a huge power of incumbency like we all have, I think the only level playing field for a candidate is to get out there and hustle and put their name up on a sign on public right-of-ways, on regional roads, and on lawns. I think that is part of a competitive process that at least we have an equal footing on, because we are all, as incumbents, competing with non-incumbents in the same way for those sign locations. So I think it's important for us to continue to allow signs on regional roads for the sake of democracy and to level the playing field. Also, in terms of highlighting our community, I can only imagine if we banned lawn signs and we have abysmal voter turnout as it is. People complain about signs for sure, but at least they know there's a municipal election. You take those signs down, I hazard to guess what's going to happen to our turnout. And I'll just share my own anecdotal story. There was a candidate in Waterloo a few years ago who was able to get their signs out really quickly and, caught my attention, caught my neighbor's attention, like, who is this person? Never run before. And you go to the website and you follow up, and that person got elected. So, it's only an anecdotal story, but I think that if we remove signs from regional bylaws, all we are doing from regional right-of-ways, all we're doing is increasing the power of incumbency, making it that much harder for a newer person to break in. And, I think it's just, when our democracy is under the kind of threat that it is right now, and low voter turnout, voter apathy, for incumbents like us to sit around and say, we're going to take away your ability to put up a sign, I really think that it's, I think it's just self-serving and not the right way to go. So, and that's, one of the reasons why I supported the deferral to the committee, is that we have done a lot of work in this area. Twice in the past 3 election cycles, we've amended the sign bylaw. We have an effective bylaw in place. It's, if some people don't like putting up the signs, fine. But it's effective, it's worthwhile, and I think it's the only avenue that folks who are trying to break into municipal politics have a level playing field to compete with, because the power of incumbency is so high and is statistically proven by all kinds of research. So that's my view on this issue, Madam Chair, and I'd be happy to have it go back to committee for further study and review.
So, Councillor Strickland, you did indicate that you were kidding, and I dealt with it in a jocular manner. Are you suggesting that it not come back till 2023, or was that a joke?
Well, in the interest of moving the process forward and not having a discussion for another 2 hours, I personally think that we have an effective sign bylaw right now. I would advocate for no change, but if the group wants to send it back for committee and to come back with some recommendations in time for the next election cycle, I would support that.
Thank you. And I guess people are being very passionate about this. I would hate for anyone to ascribe motives, and I realize that you were sort of quoting that study, Councillor Strickland, but I think everybody's admitted that we do see the advantage of incumbents having signage, so I don't think it's self-serving. I think there are a whole lot of motives and many sides to this debate, and I'm sure you weren't describing that motive to any of our colleagues.
Well, Madam Chair, I'm saying as an incumbent myself, I think it would be self-serving. It'd be much easier for me not to have to put up signs on regional roads. It'd be much easier for me. Right. And I think that is self-serving. So I stand by my comments, Madam Chair.
Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, it won't be self-serving for me because I don't put hardly any on regional roads. So we've been through this a number of times. This is certainly not the first time that we've gone through this. And I think on each occasion, we have kind of ratcheted back the ability for people to put signs on regional roads. So we've restricted the numbers that you can put on in between intersections. We've restricted the number of meters that it has to be away from the intersection. And each time we kind of nibble away at reducing the ability to put a lot of signs on. And I think maybe the time has come for us to just go the rest of the way. And I've never been actually in favor of doing away with signs on regional property, even though I don't use the regional property myself as an incumbent. But I think times have changed, and I'm actually quite pleasantly amazed that so many people have said it's time. There are very few people who have reached out and said that this is the wrong way to go. And this has now been in the public domain now for a few weeks. It's been the subject of newspaper articles and radio shows, and we're just not hearing from people as we did in the past. And I think the reason that we haven't heard very many people in the past, because this is just kind of counterintuitive now, the way people think you should advertise. With the advent of the internet and social media advertising, which is so economical and so effective, I think people think, particularly those people who are thinking about running, they think, why should I spend $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 on signs when you know how many Facebook hits I can get for that kind of money? Much more effective, or even some radio spots if you're inclined to do that. I know some people will say, well, not everybody is on the internet or they don't go there. But I believe there are more people than you think. I just bought a new computer for my 96-year-old mother, and she's on it every day. And I think she's not all that uncommon compared to many people, elderly people. I do believe, I don't want to categorically argue with Councillor Strickland about who it gives an advantage to. I'm of the mind, and always have been of the mind, that it gives an advantage, that is the ability to put signs on regional railways, to the incumbent. Because as Councillor Erb has said, we've got them in our garage. They're paid for. They're ready to go. There's no additional cost unless you have to supplement them or increase the numbers that you may have lost a few last time. I haven't had to buy new signs for the last 4 elections. So you tell me that doesn't advantage an incumbent. A new person has to go out and get those built, get those made, the cost associated with that. I just think it's all the advantage of the incumbent, and particularly now with other alternate ways of advertising and promoting your campaign. I will say, however, that I do subscribe to what Mike Morrice and now Councillor Clarke has indicated, that maybe we should look at this through a diversity, equity, inclusion lens to make sure that we do have this right. I think that's incumbent of us to do that. I'm not really sure, and Madam Chair, I don't really want to debate the deferral going to the licensing committee, but I think if we were to defer it for some reason to get the DEI kind of lens assigned to this, I don't know if it really has to go through the licensing committee. I'm hoping that this can be done in a fairly expeditious manner, because we do have an election coming up where I would hope that these rules would apply. It sounds to me as if we could put a whole lot of process into this, going into a committee and having surveys done and a lot of work put into it, and easily take 6 months, 9 months, whatever, and we'll be into the federal, provincial, and even the municipal election before we get a decision on this. So I'll be looking hopefully for a solution or an option that would allow for the equity lens to be put on this. We certainly don't want to do anything that would harm that, because we certainly desperately need more diverse representation on our councils. I fully support that and would not want to do anything that would deter that. So, Madam Chair, those are my views on it. I believe that the ability to put signs on public property is a distinct advantage to the incumbent, both in terms of the cost and the numbers of volunteers that they have, the expertise and the knowledge that they have in terms of the locations, a lot of the things that Councillor Erb has enunciated. So I'm not sure where that leaves us procedurally, because we've got deferrals and other suggestions, but those are my views, Madam Chair.
So thank you, Councillor Galloway, but you're not suggesting an amendment, and we would have to check with the mover and the seconder if it was friendly, but you're suggesting you don't think the licensing committee is the right one, but that specifically is where Councillor Rentz was referring this issue.
Well, Madam Chair, I'm expecting, if that's going to be heard, I'll be speaking again to that.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Brabanovich.
Thanks, Chair Redmond. I used to always be told that you're never supposed to talk about religion or politics, and I'm learning that you shouldn't talk about religion, politics, or election signs, because you get 16 people in a room and there's 23 views, no doubt, on this issue. But in all seriousness, this is an issue that I've grappled with for some time, and have had some strong views on it, similar to those of Councillor Rentz, Strickland, and Clarke, around the importance of people being able to put lawn signs on regional road right-of-ways, if that was something that they chose to do, simply from a perspective of being able to get name recognition. Having said that, in my own campaigns, and quite frankly, even in looking at the vast majority of people on this council and the vast majority of campaigns, the majority of signs end up on people's lawns. That's the reality of it. And that's where they should end up, because as from the very first campaign that I ran in, I was always reminded by the folks that helped out with my campaigns, people vote, signs don't. And that's the harsh reality of it. And so it's really incumbent on us to keep that in mind as we go forward. In saying that, historically, I would have been aligned with councillors, Lawrence and Strickland and Clarke and some others, no doubt, on this issue. Like Councillor Galloway, I'm also noticing a change in attitude around the community on this issue. I would not have expected to hear from so many people, either directly or through emails or social media, and not just average citizens, but people who have been engaged in campaigns, winning campaigns, losing campaigns, people who have run for parties or local government, and who are increasingly of the view that the piece that speaks to regional road right-of-ways is something that we should seriously consider restricting. And I think that's what we need to keep in mind is the vast majority of signs are still going to be up. And they're going to be up on people's lawns, even if we implement this. So, when I look at what Councillor Erb is asking for, he's asking that we send this to staff to send it back to staff to go and look at the bylaw and making changes to eliminate. It's possible that as part of that, they may, make recommendations also that if council weren't inclined to eliminate, here's some other things you can do to clean it up. Which is, I think, what Councillor Renson and Strickland's amendment is really speaking to, is let's just have a process around it, one that will engage people before we make this change. And then ultimately it'll come back, we'll have the discussion, we'll have the debate, and we're going to go forward. Now, the only thing I would ask is that when we do it, we're also, and again, I recognize there's many views out there, but that we try to be factual in our information. So, I know, for example, Councillor Erb has talked about the ability of signs to be repurposed or not. And so he's right. We can't throw them in our blue bin and have them recycled. But the last few elections, our waste management division has had a special place where they can be dumped. And they have, in fact, been sent to a place in Quebec or elsewhere where, in fact, they get put into pellets and they become park benches and plastic Adirondack or Muskoka chairs and other products like that. So I think we just need to, in our passion around this issue, let's just make sure we keep it as factual as possible, and then let's make the decision that needs to happen. So whereas before I wasn't open to the discussion because I thought this was the right way to go, I am open to the discussion and open to potentially making changes. And, I think part of that should involve the equity and diversity lens that we're talking about. Although I will caution council, one of the things I'm learning even in our own shop is over at the city is be careful to not start sending everything over there because very quickly they're going to have a whole list of things to deal with and not actually deal with the ones that are most important. And so we need to be careful of that as we move forward. So with that, those are my comments. And I'm hoping that between Councillor Erb's motion and what Councillor Rentz and Strickland are advocating for, we can actually come up with something that will allow the discussion to move forward and just put a little bit more process behind it.
Thank you, Councillor Ravanovich. Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, and through the chair. Ladies and gentlemen on council, I'm so proud of you and the discussions because when I'm asked what I think about this in advance, I go, I need to hear the discussion. I need to hear all sides. And you do an amazing job, and I thank you so much for who you are, your thoughts, and everything else. I still don't have a right or wrong opinion yet. I like that it goes back to the diversity thing. I just have one comment to Councillor Erb is that whether we ban them or not, bylaws still going to have to be out there checking because people are going to be, and especially in the townships. I'm picking up signs that are a year and 2 years old. I'm walking up hills because bylaw hasn't gotten out there to do it. And I don't do well walking up hills. I roll down really easy, but I don't do well going up. So thank you for the discussion. And bylaw will still be involved, Councillor, regardless.
Thank you, Councillor Foxton. Councillor Harris is next.
Oh, well, thank you. I was wondering when my turn was coming up, but I'm not going to, get into the details because my colleagues have, I think, eloquently, relayed a lot of the same comments, and I won't repeat them. I will say that my preference would be to stick with the status quo on this one. However, I suppose in this case, I would be supportive of Councillor Lorenz's and Strickland's, deferral motions. I would say that Councillor Strickland really highlighted a lot of my sentiments on this particular issue. I know that, signs, they unfortunately don't vote, but they sure remind people to get out and vote. And I think that we've been, during elections, really encouraging voter turnout to be one of the most important, the important matters when an election comes up. And I think that signs are a great reminder for those to get out and vote. I will say, as a young, and again, an anecdotal type statement, as a young person wanting to get into it, I made that investment to invest in signs, and I think that assisted in my initial runs, I suppose. And I definitely do believe that, if we were to eliminate and ban signs, it would have a very significant advantage to incumbents. I want to, for the record, state, though, that I dislike buying signs. I dislike putting signs up, and I very much dislike taking them down. And I want that, for the record, known that I dislike all three very, very much. However, I feel they are an important function of democracy, especially in municipal elections, when, unlike provincial or federal elections, you have a leader, massive advertising on TV, and a whole sorts of different resources. And I can speak from a personal perspective, now being in the municipal realm, that for municipal folks, getting that opportunity to invest in some signs at a fraction of the cost as to what it would be to advertise on CTV or the Record is an affordable way to get your name out. And it has had, I think, positive benefits to those folks who now sit at the table. I had a quick chance to look at some of our other municipalities throughout the province. I did send to my colleagues, an interesting scenario that the city of Markham has, which I think is actually quite similar to the region of Waterloo's, being that we've had modified sign bylaws in 14 and 17. I will recall as a provincial candidate kind of being told last minute that the size of the sign was changed after I had already purchased a lot of signs that were larger in size. And so that was an inconvenience, but hey, we lived with it at the time. And so in Markham, they actually have restricted areas that you have to place your signs, and it's usually on those regional roads. And I think for our community, being it's a 2-tier 1, it's easy for Waterloo and Kitchener to ban their signs because you still have those major arterial roads in the region to place those signs. There are only one, I think, a sign allowed per major intersection, between major intersections. And I think, they've done a pretty good job refining the bylaw to clean it up, to make sure that we don't have a lot of waste. And yeah, signs are ugly. We all, even I don't like looking at my own sign. Heck, I put my photo on it and it's even worse looking at when I drive by it. But I definitely think that they're important. So, I also will add that the timing of this, and I think that this motion is very clear. And if perhaps Councillor Erb worded it differently, he may have a different result. But it's so clear that we are to direct staff to bring back to council in a timely manner a report to eliminate the placement of election signs on property owned by the region. And so that is a very definitive action, asking staff to bring back a report as to how they will eliminate or ban signs. We are in a minority parliament federally. We are elected every 4 years and can plan ahead to the next municipal election. But I know there are candidates out there who have been recently nominated for whatever variety of parties who have already purchased signs that have an expectation to be able to use the existing bylaw for that use. And I would say to you that, banning them right away would be an unfortunate thing to do to our provincial and federal, counterparts, knowing that we could literally be in an election within the next few months. And I think in order to provide some sort of, consistency or guarantee as to what we're doing, we should at the very least set it back to Jan 1 or even, January 1st or even after this next election cycle potentially. So I will end it there. Again, I believe Councillor Strickland voiced a lot of my comments very well, and we'll look forward to the discussion as we go forward.
So, Councillor Harris, there's been a lot of passion debate about this, but I would tell you that I think you have absolutely unified all of us. I think we would all agree we hate buying them, we hate putting them up, and we hate taking them down. Councillor Nowak.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'm going to be quick. Just a little bit uncertain about there's two different motions I think that we're dealing with right now. Councillor Erb is wanting to send this back to staff to make a report. And I think the other motion has going to License and Hearing Committee. So I'm trying to decide in my own mind, what the difference is going to be. I mean, we're still going to get a report that's going to come back to council, and we're going to have further debate. So, I'm just not sure whether there's a big difference between the two of them. Maybe somebody could explain that for me.
So, Councillor Nowak, I think we're going to have the motion put up on a screen share to make sure that we're all on the same page, because this has been a bit of a movable feast. I don't know if that's going to help or if you want further clarification.
Well, I'd like to know what approach staff would take to deal with this as opposed to licensing and the hearing committee. So are we going to would they come out with two separate? I mean, if we send it to both of them, would the reports be different? Is there a different approach to this?
I would suggest that Councillor Harris did a really good job of saying that Councillor Erb's motion is to ban signs on rights of way and regional owned property. And the referral that Councillor Lawrence and Strickland have moved with a friendly amendment from Councillor Clarke refers it to licensing committee without an assumed outcome at that point in time. But I would look to Councillor Lawrence for that clarification, if that reflects what you meant.
Yeah, I think maybe Councillor Lawrence.
Yeah, well, and it certainly does. And I guess, just so I could be a little clearer, things have been really strange since this COVID. We've got 3 standing committees. We have 3 chairs that get paid, and they haven't chaired a meeting in 14 or 13 months. We keep moving things away. We've never had a transportation meeting or a public works meeting, or we've had any basically finance at budget, but we've left our semblance of order. We have 3 other standing, or not so much standing, but Helen Jowett chairs one. I chair licensing. Jim, you chair the affordable housing, and we don't discuss things anymore. We're just kind of moving away from the structure that we have in place. I think we need to get back to the structure. We need to get back to talking to our staff and sitting down as a committee and talking about these things instead of doing it over YouTube. And that's what I'm hoping, that we can have a little bit of a pause here. We can go back and we can keep cool heads. And we've had a great discussion here tonight, and talk about these important things and see what it takes to clean it up and tighten it up. But I'm very concerned about the erosion of democracy. I mean, this isn't my life. I have another life as well. I know some of you don't, but I'm not self-consumed by all of this stuff. But I think it's really important that people have opportunities to do what I did when I first started. I had a vision and I tried to get it across to people. I didn't have any money really, but I had people that bought into it. And when you work your way up and you convince people, but when you just throw all the tools in the toolbox out and just expect that people are going to run for a regional council in the city of Kitchener and knock on 100,000 doors and put signs up, like, it's just not possible. So instead of taking away people's opportunities to make good decisions and bad decisions, we're just telling them that you can't do it anymore. So that's what I'm worried about. I got in this to help my community, and I think I've done that. And I want other people that looked at what I did and have the opportunity to do that too. And when you take away advantages of people that hardly have any in the first place, it's tough. So I think we need to take a breath. I like Michael's suggestion that we look at some kind of a timeline as to whether it's by the end of the year, get public consultation. We look at a number of different options. We clean it up. We make sure that the violators are, maybe that the fine should be heavier. I don't know. You all play this game. You all know, how it would work. But the bottom line is we need to protect our democracy. Municipal elections have always been messy. They'll always be messy. And it's part of our heritage, and it's part of our country, and it's part of our tradition. And if you want to take that away and put it on the internet so people that are interested in that, that's fine. And I've said from the outset, I have never put signs on regional right-of-ways. So I have no skin in this game at all. But I think it's important that we give everybody else an opportunity to at least have the same somewhat advantage as we've had in the past and what they can have in the future. So I think it should go back to the committee. I think the committee, all members of council can sit in on the committee meeting and we can discuss it there. But I think that this is an opportunity for us to really reflect on this and see if we can come back with something that's cleaner, or we go ahead with Councillor Erb's motion and just ban them. That would be my.
So, Councillor Lorenz, I think you sort of hit on the fork in the road right here. What we could do is vote on Councillor Erb's notice of motion, and if it's defeated, then a new motion could be put on that this whole issue be referred to licensing committee with a referral to equity, diversity, and inclusion in the anti-racism group, or we can vote on the motion to defer. I would just look at, Councillor Lorenz, which is your preference?
Well, Madam Chair, I'm starting to fade. I had a bit of an accident this week, and I'm running out of steam. So my seconder might have probably better thoughts than I do.
Okay.
Doesn't sound like you're running out of steam.
The meds are kicking in.
Councillor Strickland, what's your view?
Well, look, I understand. Like, if we, the notice of motion is really to ban signs, and the deferral is to look at that as a potential option amongst other options. So, I understand where the clerk's coming from. To be cleaner, we would, vote on Councillor Erb's motion, and either it passes or is defeated. And then if it's defeated, a secondary motion would come forward to refer it to committee to look at ways we could possibly change the sign by law in advance of the next meeting, in advance of the next election.
So
exactly
that's
what I was going to say.
Sorry, Councillor Lorenz.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
So let's deal with the question. I think it's probably
okay. I think
Barry
that's
may have a different
fair.
idea, but
Councillor Vrbanovich.
Thanks. Just listen. I mean, Councillor Erb's motion is directing it to go to staff. To look at the issue of eliminating signs. We're not making that decision tonight. There would still be a public process and so on, and that public process presumably would, and the staff report would look at things like the EDI piece. So I think where we're getting hung up is on the issue of, could staff come back? Will they come back with just an option to eliminate them, or will they come back with options to to perhaps change the regulations? And so my question to Councillor Erb is, are you open to sending it back to staff so that it in fact looks at both pieces, and we'll hear from the public as part of that?
So I guess I would suggest that this may be a juncture for, I think what Councillor Vrbanovich is talking about, which is a friendly amendment. If the mover and the seconder would consider it being, rather than staff report back to council, that it be staff take a report to the licensing committee. It could come back to council as well. But I would say that I've heard a fair amount of support for the equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism piece being part of that. So I don't know, Councillor Strickland, if that's where you were headed.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, I think Barry's onto something there. Councillor Erb and Councillor Galloway are amenable to a friendly amendment. I think the challenge is that the motion as is written right now is definitive, that staff comes back with a report on how to eliminate lawn signs, and that's the problem. So if Councillor Erb is amenable to, directing it to staff to review potentials to amend the current sign bylaw, including the possibility of eliminating whatever the word is, election signs from right away, and then that'll give, and refer to the licensing committee to review that. That would be the body to look at it, I think. So if there's just some flexibility in the motion, because right now the motion is pretty clear, send it to staff to bring back a report saying that we're gonna eliminate election signs on regional right-of-ways, and so I think that's part of the challenge.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Erb, and then I will go to Councillor Galloway as the seconder. Councillor Erb?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, I'm prepared to accept a friendly amendment. And so the last section of the motion, if anybody has it in front of them, is direct staff to bring back to council in a timely manner a report to eliminate. And I would suggest that we could, timely manner, a report to consider the elimination of election signs on property owned by the Regional Municipality with input from the Equity and Diversion Committee and licensing of that. And so if that would satisfy Council, I'd be happy to amend the motion to that if Councillor Galloway would be willing to second it.
Okay, Councillor Galloway, your views?
Well, Madam Chair, I was going to suggest something similar to that, but I'm not sure that, unless Councillor Erb wants to keep it in, I'm not sure the licensing committee is the proper place to be dealing with this.
That's where all the changes came out of the last time.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to be licensing election signs. So part
of enforcement.
I think that we've had, I'd like to see, my preference, and this is not a hill to die on for me, it has to go to the licensing committee, that's fine. But I would rather see that staff come back with a report that would have options in it. And one of those options, of course, would be to eliminate signs entirely, and that staff would put into place some consultation with whether it's the anti-racism group or our diversity, equity, inclusion unit, that we would get their input at that same time and would be part of that report. That's the way I see it going forward.
Thank you. I see several speakers. Councillor Jaworski, did you take your hand down?
I was only going to suggest eliminate or reduce as potential language, but Councillor Galloway's on to something.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask Tim to screen share to see if we've captured what we're talking about. And I see both Councillor Jowett and Councillor Mann, who have not spoken to this issue, have hands up. So Councillor Jowett, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Redmond. I'm wondering if we can start using the timer, your timer, on when we speak to some of these items, so we can shorten some of the conversations. However, I was just wondering, is there any merit in having the licensing committee, thanks to the beautiful technology of Zoom, and our equity and diversity inclusive members have a tete-a-tete about what this looks like with staff from licensing? Because I know that, and I appreciate Councillor Erb's report, fulsome as it was, but I'm sure our bylaw people probably have some other information to share. Again, you know, we have committees for a reason, and they have some knowledge there. They have some intelligence there already that can be used. So I'm just wondering, is that something? And I'm sorry, does that sound like a friendly amendment, or did I just add to the cluster challenge here? And I apologize if I did, but I feel like we're going around and around and around a bunch of different edges. And I just think that what everybody wants is, and I don't even like talking this long, it irritates me, is equity and diversity, inclusive people, sitting down with the committee itself and our staff from licensing, and maybe they could come back to us with something absolutely beautiful.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Mann, and then we're going to put up what we think we're hearing, and we can continue to mold it.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll be very brief. I've really appreciated the conversation that's taken place this evening, because we've heard both sides of what some would really like to see and what others would really like to see, and then we've had a compromise, and I think that's been tremendous tonight. And I'm glad to see the compromise that we've been able to come to, and I think that's the benefit of the healthy discussion that's taken place. So thank you for that, and that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you for that positive note. Can we put up what we think we're looking at? Okay, Tim is just scribing. This topic is definitely deserving of discussion. Colleagues, we do have a delegation and we have lots more to cover tonight, just as an FYI.
Good job is what I would say.
Okay, so Sean has signed off. Can I hear from Councillor Erb and Councillor Galloway?
I couldn't have done a better job myself of writing it. Thank you.
Super. Councillor Galloway.
Not a hill to die on. I'll go along with it.
Okay. And Councillor Strickland has spoken. Councillor Rentz?
Yes, I certainly support it. Great. Thank you, Tim.
Okay, so we know the motion before us. So I would say that this is a friendly redo of our notice of motion. And I didn't tell you to vote yet, Councillor Verbanovich. So it has been shaped by this entire council, I would say, but moved by Councillor Erb and seconded by Councillor Galloway. And I would ask you to use your icons to vote yes or no. So that is carried, colleagues. I would now invite, we have a delegation who registered today, and we'll get 3 minutes, and that's Simone Lauren from Kitchener, and it's regarding the Committee of the Whole summary, proposed extension to face covering and code of use bylaw, including amendments to these bylaws. Simone, welcome, and our apologies for keeping you this long. You have the floor, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. I'm not sure how many of you take the bus, but I'm just going to hesitate to guess that it's not many or not frequently. I recently moved from Midtown, Belmont, over to downtown Kitchener, and I decided to live in downtown because of the accessibility to the transit system that we have that I think is awesome. It's well built up. I'm pretty privileged to be able to work from home during this pandemic, but I still have like dentist appointments, doctor's appointments that I need to get to. So for that, I take public transit. But the mask policy on public transit just isn't sufficient in that the drivers who drive the bus don't need to wear masks. And so whenever I was concerned about this, right? Like my day job is being a science communicator, like know the science. And I mean, we all do by now, to be honest, right? We all know that like airborne transmission for COVID-19. So the drivers, oh, this is my cat. The driver, for the way that the Grand River Transit policy is right now, it's based on bylaw 13-050, like 50, that's going to be amended tonight. So I would ask that you amend it to state that drivers need to wear masks, because right now the policy states that drivers, sorry, she loves Zoom calls. The drivers don't need to wear masks as long as they're behind a plexiglass barrier. And that plexiglass barrier sits right between the driver and then where a patron of the bus would go to pay to come on, right? So the patrons come right between the bus driver and them all day. And these patrons are our frontline workers, our nurses, our workers at Tim Hortons. Whenever I went to my dentist appointment, the one time that I did take the bus there, and then I Ubered home because I didn't feel comfortable with a maskless driver. I saw somebody who worked at like Burger King, Tim Hortons, and I saw an RN because I went right by the GRH. So these are our frontline staff, and I really feel that it's your duty to write in explicitly in the bylaw that every person on transit should be wearing a mask. Dr. Wang earlier said in her slide, wear a mask on transit. Yet the GRT policy states that as long as drivers are behind a plexiglass barrier that doesn't provide an airtight seal or anything, they don't need to wear masks. I don't see the evidence base for this policy, and I've reached out to Grand River Transit directly. They referred me to bylaw. I completely understand like that the bylaw officers are busy right now, so they didn't get back to me. This was like a month ago, so I'm coming to you. That's all I have to say.
So Simone, I want to thank you for your patience in your concise comments. And I think this is national. Every cat should take their person to council meeting day. So your cameo by your cat was very delightful. I'm going to ask Mr. Schmidt to talk about Grand River Transit and ION, specifically vis-a-vis the requirements of masks and our drivers and operators. Mr. Schmidt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yes, drivers on GRT buses and on trains are not required to wear a mask when they are behind the plexiglass screen. And in the case of ION, actually in a completely separate compartment, they're not required to wear a mask in those circumstances. When that policy was developed, we did speak with the medical officer of health. They did approve this process. So it's not something that GRT did in isolation. We did seek guidance from the medical officer of health, and they agreed that that was protective of both the driver and the members of the public. There is also, yes, when a passenger does come and enters a bus, there is a moment when they're there beside the plexiglass screen. But for the majority of the trip, there is a spatial separation between the driver and passengers, who basically the first, depending on which bus it is, the first 2 or 3 rows of the bus are basically cordoned off, and passengers aren't allowed to get into those areas. So we feel, and if a driver does leave that plexiglass area, they are required to wear a mask at that time. So we believe that based on the information that we have, that this approach is protective of both the health of the passengers and the customers. And while we obviously can't definitively say that there haven't been any cases of transmission, but we definitely have not seen any drivers that we're aware of become ill from transmission on a bus. And passengers I can't speak to, but definitely drivers, we don't have any information to suggest transmission has occurred.
Councillor, does anybody have any questions of the delegation? Seeing none, Simone, thank you very much for coming in and for your patience.
Thank you. Chair, am I allowed to make a comment?
You're absolutely allowed to send us something in writing, but we don't generally enter into debate.
Oh, no, that's fair. That's fair. It was just a comment on what Mr. Schmidt had said.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to the recommendations that pertain to what the delegation just talked about, and that's that the Regional Municipality of Waterloo extends the requirements of the face covering bylaws and code of use bylaws. That's A. B is the face covering bylaw and amendments to the code of use bylaws, requirements for business and organizations with regulations for the Reopening Ontario Act until they are revoked. Sorry, I didn't read that very well. They're in place until the requirements for under the Reopening of Ontario Act are revoked, and that the amending bylaws as set out in Appendix A and B in the report attached dated May 11th, 2021 be amended pursuant to paragraphs A and B above and forwarded to Council for approval. So this is moved by I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Clarke, do you have a question or a comment? Go ahead.
Thank you. I did have a question, Mr. Schmidt. I believe that the delegation referred to the policy as a bylaw, and I don't believe that this is in fact a bylaw. I believe that this is just a human resource policy.
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct. This is not a bylaw. This is a policy that's being set by GRT.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to confirm that it's the bylaw is silent on our employees on GRT.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. I hope Simone is still in the room. Could I have a mover for the extension? Moved by Councillor Foxton, seconded by Councillor Jowett. Please use your yes and no icons to vote for this. That is carried. Thank you, colleagues. We're now I'm going to entertain a motion to approve minutes from previous meetings as listed, A through I. I need a mover and a seconder. These are moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Clarke. Councillor Kiefer, do you have a question, or were you moving?
No, I slipped up on my fingers there.
Okay, thank you. Please use your yes and no icons to vote on the minutes of our previous meetings. That is carried. Thank you, colleagues. Next on the agenda are communications. Council would have received an information package electronically. And I would draw your attention to Keely Dedman, Chair of the Regional Public Works Commission of Ontario, regarding the finalization of the Blue Box regulation. This was part of your correspondence. And I would ask John Arsenault to please discuss this. Or
Through you, Madam
Schmidt.
Chair, I'm not sure if John is here.
Okay.
So I can provide some information on that. Essentially, as you're aware, the province and stewards who are the producers of the different waste and recyclable products, have been discussing with municipalities the proposal to move 100% of the cost of the Blue Box program to the stewards. This has been ongoing for a number of years, and we were actually quite hopeful that there would be a resolution and that process would start. There have been delays over the last 6 months, and in particular, we believe we're at a critical time. If we don't start to get clear direction from the province that this is happening or not happening, we will, over the next month or two, we will have to proceed, and other municipalities will have to proceed with making decisions on how we deal with our blue boxes, which could in the long run end up costing us more money and effort, especially if then a decision is made later to move back to 100 or to move to 100% producer responsibility. So this letter from the Regional Public Works Commissioners of Ontario, which I'm a member of, and which is essentially all the commissioners in upper and single tier municipalities, have agreed to send this letter and are requesting that council support this in going to the province and asking them to make a decision very imminently, hopefully in the next month or two, on moving forward with 100% steward responsibility for blue boxes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schmidt. So I'm looking for a mover and a seconder. The motion reads that the Region of Waterloo advocate for the finalization of the Blue Box regulation so that producers, municipalities, and service providers are provided with clear direction to plan a new system so it can be implemented efficiently and seamlessly at the lowest possible cost to taxpayers, producers, and consumers alike. So this is moved by Councillor Galloway, seconded by Councillor Erb. I see no discussion. All those in favor, please use your icons for yes and no. That is carried. Thank you, colleagues. I'll now entertain a motion to go into the Committee of the Whole to consider reports. The motion is that council go into the committee of the whole to consider reports. Could I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Mann. Please use your icons to vote yes and no. That is passed. Councillor Galloway, do you have a question or a comment, or are you voting with your hand? So that's carried.
That was premature. I'm getting ready for finance reports.
Okay. Now we have finance reports A to I. As they are listed before you, I believe these are moved by Councillor Galloway, or do you have a question on them, Councillor Galloway?
Yes, Madam Chair. I have a question on finance report. I believe it's G. So this is the push button equipment and the subject of considerable annoyance for cyclists and pedestrians around the community. And I guess since I've been out on my bike a lot more these days, I have run into this situation on many, many occasions. So I know this is a tender and I appreciate, but is this the last time we're going to be buying push button signals? I was hopeful that we were going to be able to migrate to the new technology from MyoVision, and in order to possibly eliminate at least those intersections where we have this conflict between pedestrians and cyclists trying to get some kind of priority to cross, where the automobile is getting most of the priority. And as a cyclist, it's particularly annoying. So where you have to get off your bike and go to the post and hit the button. So I just wanted to use this opportunity to highlight this again, and maybe Mr. Schmidt can comment on where we're at in terms of the new technology.
Mr. Schmidt?
Through you, Madam Chair, the MyoVision technology will actually not solve that issue. So on cyclists, if you're cycling on the road, the issue can be one of the detectors essentially not detecting your bicycle. So MyoVision could, I suppose, help with that. That is a possibility. But for the buttons on the side of the road for pedestrians, the MyoVision technology will not help with that. One of the big issues with any of the technologies that are looking at visuals is trying to determine which way is the pedestrian actually going. So when they come up to an intersection, when you're pressing a button, you actually, on those intersections that have it, which I would say the majority of our intersections actually do not require that. There are some that do. In many cases, the button is simply to activate the sound for the vision impaired. So the button is not required on the whole main corridor. The button's not required to actually cross, but it is required to activate the sound. So right now, I would say we continue to watch technologies, and if there is a technology that can reliably detect a pedestrian and detect a cyclist, and then be able to determine which way to change the lights, we are watching that. But that technology, to our knowledge, does not exist right now.
I thought when we had this discussion the last time, Mr. Smith, that there were cameras or other types of sensors as opposed to the in-road sensors that were being used in other jurisdictions that were able to pick up pedestrians and pick up cyclists, rather than for cyclists or pedestrian having to wait for a car to show up in order for the light to change.
So there is technology and it exists for cyclists for sure, people and cars on the road as well. So we do use some of that. It also has issues with it. For pedestrians, it is available, but the difficulty is a pedestrian simply walking up to an intersection, there is no, even though you detect that they're there, there is no way to know, are they planning on going straight or turning? Which leg of the intersection are they going to turn? Are they planning to use? And currently the infrastructure just doesn't exist to be able to 100% determine which way is a pedestrian going to go. So so basically that technology has a number of flaws in it. On the cycling, I can see where we are, but I do know there are a number of downsides to using visual detection of cyclists, and they can be missed, from my understanding, just as easily as with the detectors in the road. What we do ask is that if people are having difficulty at intersection, they let us know. There are times when there can be issues with the detector loops, and we can fix those. Also, positioning your bicycle correctly is also important to be detected.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to raise the issue again since we were doing a tender. I know there's AODA implications, and there has to be buttons and signals for that purpose. But I really do wish there was a better technological solution, particularly for cyclists who have to wait for a car to show up in order to get a green light. And I hope over time we can resolve this issue. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Thank you, Councillor Galloway. Can I have a mover and a seconder? These are for finance reports A through I. Moved by Councillor Clarke, seconded by Councillor Jaworski. All those in favor, please use your yes and no icons. That is carried. Thank you, colleagues. We'll now vote to approve the summary of the Committee of the Whole on May the 11th, 2021. This actually goes on for a few pages. Page 13, no, sorry. It's item 1 through 13. Could I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Kiefer, seconded by Councillor Erb. All those in favor, please use your icons for yes and no. That is carried. Thank you, colleagues. We now have an item from the closed council meeting of today, May 19th, 2021. And it is about a settlement with a numbered company for expropriation of property at 296 Fairway Road, South Kitchener. Do I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Galloway, seconded by Councillor Jowett. See no discussion, so please use your icons to vote yes and no. That is carried. Thank you, colleagues. Mr. Lochner, do you have anything to report tonight?
I do, Madam Chair, through you. I know it's been a long night, but I did want to mention a couple of staff-related matters. Commissioner Bartholomew Saunders just sent you an update, and I wanted to publicly congratulate Connie Lacey, our Director of Senior Services, on becoming the Chair of Advantage Ontario, which represents not-for-profit organizations like Sunnyside that provide seniors care. This is good for the region, and it's also good for seniors in Ontario. So congratulations, Connie. Also want to add my congratulations to councils, to Dr. Wang this morning, and the presentation of a prayer shawl at the Interfaith Community Breakfast in recognition of her work to keep this community safe. And I know Shirley, being the humble person that she is, will say that there's an amazing team behind her. And I have talked to a number of her team members today, and they are extremely proud of Shirley and proud to work alongside her. On a more somber note, I did want to let council know that we lost 2 members of the regional family in the last 2 weeks, and I wanted to acknowledge these wonderful individuals. Paul McLean was a lead hand for facilities at Sunnyside Home. Paul started with the region in 2009, and he worked in the maintenance department as a senior maintenance tech until he took on the role of the lead hand in 2017. And I know he is sorely missed by by the team and residents at Sunnyside. And this week, Joanne Markovic, who was a materials analyst and senior buyer in purchasing, passed away. Joanne began working in the region in 2003. I've heard just tremendously heartwarming stories about both Paul and Joanne, and I wish I joined the region earlier to have had the chance to know both of them better. I know the memories that the team has will give them strength in the weeks and months ahead. Our hearts certainly go out to Paul and Joanne's families and their loved ones during this difficult time, and also to their region family, who are who are a big part of their lives. So condolences to all, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lochner, for those updates. Next agenda item, other matters under the Committee of the Whole, is mental health and well-being supports tourism and hospitality workforce, and this is for information. Is somebody speaking to this? Thank you, Mr. Chandy or Mr. Regier, who wants to start off. This is such a good news support that we're offering in the community. Rod, do you want to start, or will we go to Matthew?
I'll just ask Matthew to provide a brief overview of what's being proposed here, because I do think it's a really great story.
Thank you, Chair. So the report before you highlights a new program that is in response to an immediate need for mental health and well-being services in the tourism and hospitality sector. The WorkWell team at the Y had the opportunity to present to the Economic Development Committee on March 31st with regards to a survey that was done for the hospitality workforce that really identified the need for immediate mental health services. It was one of the top asks from the respondents to the surveys. This is one of the things that they need, and access was a challenge for this sector and for this workforce. So we've been able to partner with Horizon, who will be working with other partners like the KW Counseling Center and the Counseling Collaborative of Waterloo Region to ensure that the hospitality workforce has immediate access to programming and supports across the townships and the cities. And this will be a 6-month pilot program where we'll, as an initial start, the program does aim to support about 670 workers through the various sessions that are being offered through the program. So we're excited to be able to provide this immediately and respond to this urgent need that the workforce in that sector, which we know has been one of the hardest hit industries in the region as a result of the pandemic. So this program will be available in the next few days. As we work with Horizon to get that up and running, there will be a dedicated phone line and website, which we'll be working with partners across the region and their municipalities to push out and make sure workers in this sector know about this new service that, again, will respond to the various mental health and well-being challenges that are being faced, particularly in this sector.
Thank you, Mr. Chandy, and thank you for your amazing investment and work in this and working with the tourism and restaurant business. Councillor Jowett.
Thanks so much, Chair Redmond, and I do have to echo your comments there for sure. Matthew, I just think people should know that, we're talking about trying to change our culture at the region, and I don't know who let you out of your cage, but you just keep hitting these home runs with these programs. And this one here, I know for a fact, everybody is so grateful for this program that you've managed to pull together. It's urgent. We know that this sector has been hurt so poorly mentally. They have no resources. Some of the bigger restaurateurs are offering free home food packages, have been at the beginning, don't know if they still are, and have kept their own tight networks of trying to look out for one another. But there are so many of the smaller restaurants and mid-sized restaurants that are hurting so badly, they don't even have the resources to really kind of check in with one another. And I just remind me of the math again, because I cannot believe you got this. I mean, EAP programs are in my wheelhouse, and I know that you got some great pricing here and a great offering that's really going to support this sector post-COVID and certainly before we even fully come out of COVID. So thanks so much for all of this. I know you had a whole team helping you, but this was a really, really big hit.
Mr. Chandy?
Thank you. Through the chair, the amount of the partnership is supported with $70,000, which will be coming from the strategic investment in business support that Regional Council approved as part of the 2021 budget, and that will support the costs for the 6-month pilot program.
Thank you, Councillor Jowett. Councillor Bravanovich.
Thanks. I too just wanted to echo the comments of Councillor Jowett to Mr. Chandy for the work that he's done on this. It's actually very timely that we're dealing with this today, because just earlier today, YMCA Workwell, which is, as we all know, associated with the YMCAs of Three Rivers, just came out with 2021 Workwell Special Issue Report on the loneliness epidemic. We're going to talk about the silent loss of social connection in our communities, and in particular focus on the communities of the Y of Three Rivers, Guelph, Waterloo region, and the Stratford area. And clearly this is an issue that I think is going to have much more far-reaching impacts than simply those in the restaurant and hospitality and tourism industries, but broadly throughout the community. And I think this is going to be an important program for those who have really struggled through this pandemic, and also will provide a foundation upon which we may need to look at other work in the coming months and years for the broader community.
Thank you, Councillor Bravanovich. I see no other. This is for information, but certainly wanted to highlight it because it's a great initiative. So thank you, Mr. Chandy. And yeah, thumbs up. Everybody's knows that this is the right thing to do. Colleagues, there's a proposed change of the start time for June 30th, 2021. I don't know that we've finished that survey. Is everybody aware that we're considering, because of some conflicts, moving the council meeting to start at 2 p.m. instead of our usual evening time? Sorry, this is just because it's June 30th. And the next day is a holiday. Councillor Erb is saying yes. Are people prepared to vote on this, or should we do a survey? We have a little bit of time before we have to decide this. Councillor Jowett.
Thanks, Chair Redmond. If there's one thing that I can say is that when we speak to the business community and the partners at Best Waterloo Region, they're actually thinking we're a little bit behind, and I'd be more inclined to say if we could get this moving forward sooner rather than later, because this is the sector that is in the most mental health crisis right now. When you speak to our restaurateurs and even Minto, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen Minto. She's usually such a positive, energetic person, but this is really weighing on her, and certainly the other leaders that are trying to support this industry. I'd really hope council could see their way to moving this forward sooner rather than later.
Yes, Mr. Chandy's acting on it, and it will start within days. The change of time and the reference that I'm making to June 30th is for the council meeting.
Oh, so we are voting on that then? Is that what you're telling me?
Well, I guess I'm looking. The clerk doesn't know if everyone's been surveyed. Councillor Foxton.
I have my calendar right here. I have no problems with moving with 2 o'clock. Councillors, how do you feel? Anybody have a problem with it?
So we
can decide.
Councillor Vravanovich.
Well, Chair Redmond, I was just going to suggest, depending on what the agendas look like the previous Tuesday, is it possible, like if they're light, is it possible that we could just ratify things at council that at special council at the end of that day, and then we don't even have to have this meeting?
Well, we can take that under advisement, and I don't know, but I know often on committee days, some of the townships have meetings, and so they're adding on to the end of the day, depending. I mean, if today's debate is any indication of the airtime, it can be a considerable amount of time. Can I just see, so do we want to just hold that in abeyance, because I don't know that everyone's been surveyed. Councillor Clarke, you're shaking no, like don't take the vote now, or you're okay changing it?
No, I was saying I have not been surveyed.
Okay.
Yeah.
And neither has, so obviously you and Councillor Jaworski were on the same list of somebody. Okay, we will do a survey and come back because we have time. So now we're going to start a vote on the Committee of the Whole to rise and Council to resume. And this is moved by Councillor Jaworski and seconded by Councillor Kiefer. All those in favor? That is carried, colleagues. A motion to adopt the proceedings of the Committee of the Whole. This is moved by Councillor Galloway and seconded by Councillor Foxton. Would you please use your icons to vote yes and no? So Councillor has adopted the proceedings of the Committee of the Whole. We've already dealt with our motion, our notice of motion. Is there any unfinished business? Other business? Any questions? So we will now start a vote to approve the bylaws as listed. These are moved by Councillor Vravanovich and seconded by Councillor Jowett. Would you please use your icons to vote yes and no? That is carried, colleagues. Thank you. And now we will consider a motion to adjourn. That is moved by Councillor Kiefer and seconded enthusiastically by Councillor Foxton. And Councillor Vravanovich is actually voting no. That is carried. Thank you, colleagues. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
I'm sure if Councillor Vravanovich wants to stay, he can stay as long as he likes.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.